You've been told that overthinking means you're smart, that if you worry enough, plan enough, analyze every detail, you'll finally feel safe, finally feel in control. But if that were true, why do your thoughts keep spinning at 2 a.m. like a broken record? Why does your chest tighten when nothing's even wrong? Why do the what-ifs keep stealing your peace, even on the days that should feel calm? Here's the truth no one told you. Overthinking isn't wisdom. It's fear, dressed up as logic. And the antidote isn't more thinking. It's stillness. It's space. It's understanding emptiness, not as something hollow or scary, but as the doorway to mental clarity. The ancient Stoics knew this. They saw the mind like the sky. Thoughts, just passing clouds. You don't need to chase them. You don't need to fight them. You just need to see through them. Because when you understand the nature of thought, when you realize not every voice in your head deserves a response, you finally find what you've been craving all along: silence, ease, freedom. And tonight, as these lessons reach you, something will shift. The noise will quiet. That tight grip around your mind will start to loosen. And you'll remember that peace was never out there. It was always in you, waiting for space to breathe. Before we begin, write this in the comments. My mind is clear. I am free. This isn't just another video. This is a mental reset, a letting go, a return to yourself. Are you ready? Let's begin. What if the thoughts keeping you up at night aren't actually real problems, but just old stories playing on repeat? You've tried everything: logic, distraction, even telling yourself to just stop thinking about it. But it doesn't work. The thoughts come back, louder than before, wearing new disguises. They follow you through your day, whisper behind every decision, and build a fog that clouds your mind. The truth is, most of what's spinning in your head isn't new. It's a pattern, and that pattern has a name. Once you see it for what it really is, it starts to lose its power. When you start naming your thought loops, something strange and powerful happens. They begin to unravel. Not because you fought them, but because you stopped letting them hide. The human brain is built to recognize patterns. It's how we survive. But when those patterns go unchecked, they become loops, unfinished, unresolved, and constantly repeating. These loops are not a sign that something's wrong with you. They're a sign that your mind is trying to protect you but doesn't know how to stop. So it keeps looping, keeps warning, keeps worrying, until you say, "Wait, I've seen you before." There's a shift that takes place when you stop reacting to every thought as if it's urgent, when you stop confusing familiar thoughts for important ones. It's the difference between getting caught in a wave and watching it rise and fall from the shore. The first step is labeling, not in judgment, but in awareness. When you say to yourself, "Oh, this is the what-if loop," or "Here comes the I'm not enough spiral," you interrupt the pattern just enough to gain space. That space is where freedom begins. Labeling doesn't mean pushing thoughts away. It means noticing them without fusing with them. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness behind them. The moment you say, "Ah, this again," you're no longer fully inside the loop. You're observing it. That alone lowers the intensity. The loop can't run wild when you're watching it with calm curiosity. The more you label these loops, the more you'll see how predictable they really are. You might notice that many of your thoughts fall into a few main categories: the worry loop, the regret loop, the future fear loop, the self-doubt loop, the resentment loop, the validation loop. Once you begin to name them, you'll see how often your mind is just recycling the same material. The voice in your head changes tone, sure, but the script rarely changes. And that's the trap. You mistake it for something new, something urgent, but it's just the loop, disguised again. Think of it like this. If a stranger walked into your house every morning and told you the same fearful story over and over, you'd eventually recognize the pattern. You wouldn't scream, you wouldn't panic. You'd say, "Ah, it's you again." That's what labeling does. It replaces panic with clarity. It gives you back the role of observer, not hostage. But to do this, you need to slow down enough to recognize the loop in action. That starts with presence. Your thoughts often run fastest when you're on autopilot, driving, scrolling, lying in bed at night. So bring awareness to those moments, not with force, with softness. When a thought comes in, pause, breathe. Ask yourself, have I heard this one before? You'll be surprised how often the answer is yes. From here, give it a label. It can be simple. The fear loop, the not good enough tape, the doomsday planner, the fixer loop. Whatever helps you create distance. The label isn't there to minimize what you feel. It's there to show you that you've been here before and you survived. You don't need to solve the thought. You just need to see it clearly. Some people like to give their loops names that are humorous. This can be incredibly helpful. When you say, "Oh look, it's Debbie Downer again," or "There's apocalyptic Alan," it breaks the seriousness. Humor is powerful because it cuts tension. It reminds you that the loop is not the truth. It's a story. And stories can be rewritten. At the very least, they can be put down. You might wonder, but what if the thought is valid? What if it really matters? That's okay. Labeling doesn't mean dismissing everything. It means recognizing what's repeating and making a conscious choice about how much attention to give it. When you know it's a loop, you give yourself permission to step back and respond later instead of reacting now. Most loops don't need solving, they need space. This is where many people get stuck. They think they need to think their way out of overthinking. But that's the loop again, convincing you it's doing something helpful. Often the mind is simply looking for closure, but some things don't need closure to let go. You can let go without a perfect answer. That's what the Stoics knew. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Naming your loops is the first step to claiming that power. Another shift happens when you start noticing the physical cues that come with each loop. For some, the worry loop starts in the chest, a tightening, a shortness of breath. For others, it's a clenching jaw or a flutter in the stomach. Your body often knows the loop is coming before your mind does. Learn to listen to it. When you feel the signal, pause. Ask yourself, what loop is starting right now? That pause interrupts the cycle, and that's all you need, an interruption. Over time, those interruptions add up. The loop loses its fuel. And here's something even more powerful. When you name a thought loop out loud, it activates a different part of your brain. Speaking your thoughts, even softly, creates distance from them. You become the narrator, not the character. Try saying, "This is the fear loop talking. It always comes up when I feel uncertain." Just that sentence disarms the intensity. You're reminding your nervous system, "We've seen this before. We don't need to run." You can take this further by writing your loops down, not as a journal of complaints, but as a map. Start collecting them. Make a list of your top 5 most common loops. Write them out in detail. Describe how they begin, what triggers them, what they try to convince you of. This isn't over-analyzing, it's pattern recognition. You're turning confusion into awareness. Once you've labeled your main loops, you'll notice something else. They tend to show up in specific environments. Maybe your self-doubt loop activates when you're around certain people. Maybe your control loop shows up when plans change. This is gold, because once you know the conditions that feed your loops, you can start changing your environment, or at least your reaction to it. Some environments can't be changed. That's okay. You still have the power to respond differently. If your loop shows up during conflict, you can train yourself to say, pause, this is the loop. If it comes up during silence or stillness, remind yourself, this is the old story trying to fill the quiet. Each time you recognize the loop, its grip weakens. You're showing your brain that it doesn't need to sound the alarm. The more you do this, the more you start to see how deeply embedded some loops are. Some may have been with you since childhood. Loops formed by fear, by shame, by moments when you felt unsafe or unseen. It's not about blaming the past. It's about acknowledging the origin so you can stop reliving it. Naming is the first act of freedom, and healing isn't loud. Sometimes it begins as quietly as saying, this thought is familiar, but I don't need to follow it. It's important to be patient with this process. Your brain loves shortcuts. Loops are shortcuts, old neural pathways that are easy to travel. But the more you pause, the more you choose presence over panic, awareness over automatic reaction, the more you carve new paths. That's how change happens, not all at once, but in repeated moments of noticing. You might find that your loops try to evolve. They might change wording, try a new disguise. That's okay. Stay alert, but not afraid. When you feel a new anxious thought trying to take root, ask, is this truly new or just the loop in a different costume? 9 times out of 10, it's the same loop wearing a hat. Don't be fooled. Stay anchored. And when you're tempted to believe your loop because it's so convincing, come back to the label. That simple act reminds you, this is a story. It might feel real, but it isn't reality. Your awareness is the reality. Your breath is real. The ground beneath you is real. The thought is just noise. You get to choose whether it stays or goes. In time, something beautiful happens. Your thoughts may still come, but they don't stay as long. They don't hit as hard. You see them arrive, name them, and let them pass. Like watching a train arrive at the station, but knowing you don't have to board it. That's clarity. That's power. That's peace. So when the loops come, and they will, don't run, don't fight, don't feed them. Just pause, breathe, say their name, and watch the silence return. Right after you've learned to label your thought loops, you begin to see how often your suffering doesn't come from reality, but from your resistance to it, your refusal to feel discomfort, your desperation to silence what feels messy. And here's the Stoic truth. It's not the presence of difficult thoughts that traps you, it's your fight against them. The Stoics called this apatheia, not indifference in the cold sense, but a calm detachment from what you can't control. They believed that the mind should be trained to coexist with discomfort without being ruled by it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are disturbed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke." That's the heart of paradoxical intention, to revoke the mind's instinct to escape, to lean into the moment, not away from it. Instead of saying, "I don't want this thought," the Stoic says, "Let it come. I remain unmoved." It goes against every modern reflex. We are taught to fix, suppress, distract. But the Stoic trains himself to sit inside discomfort without judgment. When fear comes, he watches it. When panic rises, he breathes with it. When the thought appears, "What if everything goes wrong?" he answers, "Then I will endure that too." This is not about weakness. It's about strength beyond reaction, the strength of inner freedom. Epictetus told his students, "It's not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them." And thoughts are no different. They disturb you not because they exist, but because you grip them, fight them, try to throw them out of your mind. And the Stoic answer is simple. Don't fight the wave. Step back. Watch it break. Paradoxical intention is the act of observing what the ego wants to escape. It is noticing your fear, your sadness, your anger, and letting it breathe beside you without grabbing the reins. You say, "This thought can stay. This fear can be here, but it doesn't decide what I do next." That is real Stoic control, not the illusion of a perfect empty mind, but the discipline of choosing your response even as your thoughts rage on. This kind of mental freedom doesn't come from silence. It comes from sovereignty. Thoughts may appear, reactions may stir, but you are no longer at their mercy. That's what the Stoics trained for. Not comfort, not convenience, but command over their inner world. Modern psychology caught up centuries later and gave it a label: paradoxical intention. But the Stoics had already practiced it in the quiet hours of reflection, in the chaos of war, in the heartbreak of exile. Seneca, after being forced to die by suicide, spent his final hours writing calmly to his friends. Why? Because his peace came not from circumstances, but from within. And that is the lesson. When your mind tells you, "This thought must go," and you instead say, "Let it stay," you create a space that is untouchable, a stillness beneath the noise. This is not weakness, it's courage. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the obstacle is the way, that what stands in the way becomes the way forward. So when a fear arises and you allow it instead of banishing it, you are walking the Stoic path. You're not asking the fear to leave, you're making peace with its presence. You're learning to let the thought be what it is while you remain who you are. And here's what changes when you do this consistently. Your nervous system no longer treats every discomfort as a threat. You stop flinching at the sound of your own thoughts. You stop begging your mind to shut up. You stop seeing anxiety as a sign of failure. The storm may come, but your roots hold. And in time, the storm gets quieter. Not because it leaves, but because you stop feeding it with fear. The Stoics taught that fear is a product of the imagination, that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. So when fear says, "What if I fail?" the Stoic says, "Then I will rise again." When anxiety says, "You can't handle this," the Stoic replies, "Let's find out." Not with arrogance, but with calm resolve. Paradoxical intention teaches you to let go of control over thoughts you never truly controlled in the first place. Your mind is not a machine to be shut off. It is a tool. And you are the one who decides whether to use it or be used by it. Thoughts will come. The Stoic doesn't pretend otherwise. He simply trains to meet them with clarity instead of chaos, with attention instead of attachment. with allowance, not obsession. When you allow the thought to exist without fear, you step into the role of the Stoic philosopher, the calm witness in the storm. You stop saying, "I can't have this thought." You start saying, "This thought is not me." And in that distance between stimulus and response, you become free. Let's take this further. The practice is not just mental, it is physical. When the thought shows up, what does your body do? Do your shoulders rise? Does your breath go shallow? Do you tense without knowing it? This is where you practice Stoic control, not by changing the thought, but by relaxing into it. When the panic comes, soften your shoulders, open your chest, breathe slowly. Let your body say, "There is no threat here," and your mind will follow. This is how you train the body to stop reacting to illusion. You use paradoxical intention as a compass. You say, "Yes, I will feel this discomfort. Yes, I will stay here with it. Yes, I will move forward anyway." Because fear cannot hold you when you stop trying to escape it, and thought cannot possess you when you stop believing it must be solved. The Stoic does not remove pain from life. He removes panic from pain. He removes the false belief that inner peace depends on silence. It doesn't. It depends on detachment. It depends on strength of will. It depends on the daily choice to allow what is, without letting it consume what is you. This method works when you use it consistently. You begin small. A thought arrives. You say, "Stay if you must." You go about your task. You carry on with your breath. You do not freeze. You do not obsess. You accept. At first your mind will resist. It will say, "But what if this never ends?" Let it say that. Let it try. Your job is not to believe it. Your job is to continue. And each time you do, you prove to yourself your thoughts can stay, but they don't get to stay in charge. In time, paradoxical intention becomes second nature, not in the sense that you never feel fear, but in the sense that fear no longer moves you. Thoughts may appear, but you no longer build your life around their storms. You are not fragile, you are not broken, you are not the prisoner of your own mind. You have been conditioned to resist discomfort. Stoicism trains you to sit beside it, to look it in the eye, to say, "You are allowed, but I remain." This is what Marcus meant when he said, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed." The moment you choose not to resist the thought, you rob it of its power to harm. You sit in stillness, not because the mind is empty, but because you are no longer afraid of its contents. That is where you find the deepest clarity. In the moment you stop running, and the path forward becomes clear, not by force, not by control, but by radical calm. Let it come, let it pass, let it be. You remain. When you stop resisting thoughts and allow them to pass through you, something opens up, space. In that space, choices start to appear more clearly. But then a new challenge rises, not the presence of fear, but the inability to move forward. Not the storm, but the stillness that follows it. The overthinking doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, "Are you sure? Did you decide correctly? Should you revisit it just one more time?" Even after you've named the loop, even after you've welcomed the thought, your mind can drag you back into uncertainty. Not because you don't know what to do, but because you haven't told yourself the decision is done. Without that closure, the mind circles back endlessly, looking for another angle, another confirmation, another reason to stay restless. This is where most people get stuck, after the clarity comes. Not because they lack logic, but because they lack ritual. The Stoics taught that our power lies in how we act, not how we feel. Epictetus said, "First, say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Action, not obsession. Movement, not paralysis. The Stoics didn't just think about choices, they closed them, and they used structure to do it. This is where decision cleansing comes in. It's the process of finalizing a decision with intention, so that the mind no longer needs to revisit it. It's how you signal to yourself, "We're done here." Without a ritual, the mind leaves doors half open. Thoughts leak through, scenarios creep in. You replay conversations, compare timelines, search for signs. But with a ritual, you set a clear line between before and after. This is not superstition, it's structure. A decision-cleansing ritual is the Stoic act of turning intention into closure. One of the simplest ways to do this is through symbolic action, something small but deliberate. It can be writing the decision down and sealing it in an envelope. It can be deleting the extra options. It can be saying out loud, "I chose, I commit, I move forward." These aren't just gestures, they're anchors. They tell your nervous system the loop is closed. Why does this matter? Because the brain doesn't always respond to logic. It responds to signals. If you make a decision but don't mark it, your brain treats it as unfinished business, and what's unfinished must be reopened, revisited, reanalyzed. That's how you end up stuck, thinking about a choice you already made as if you never made it at all. The Stoics knew this trap. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself, "You were born to act, not to be twisted in endless doubt." He didn't wait for perfect certainty. He chose, and then turned his attention to the next right thing. That's the discipline, not being sure, but being settled. A decision-cleansing ritual allows you to trust your decision without needing to feel perfect about it. Because feelings fluctuate, but action builds trust. Each time you cleanse a decision, you strengthen your ability to move through life without dragging old choices behind you like chains. The ritual can be as personal as you want it to be. What matters is intention. Maybe you go for a walk and, at the halfway point, say aloud what you've decided, and when you return, you don't revisit it. Maybe you light a candle, speak the choice, then blow it out, signaling the end of that mental chapter. These aren't random acts, they're containers. They hold the decision so your mind doesn't have to. This process doesn't mean you'll never doubt again. It means the doubt loses its authority, because now it's not just a passing feeling, it's something you've accounted for, you've heard it, you made your choice, and you've marked the end of the deliberation. There's power in that kind of finality. Overthinking often survives on what's left open. Even when you've made a good choice, if there's no boundary around it, the mind will pick at it. Ritual gives you that boundary. It says, the thinking phase is done. Now we execute. Now we live the answer. There's a difference between pausing to reflect and staying stuck in pause forever. The Stoics didn't glorify delay. They honored deliberation, but only as long as it led to action. Seneca said, "Delay is the greatest waste of life. It snatches away each day as it comes and denies us the present by promising the future." Every decision you leave open robs you of the now. The ritual ends that theft. But for it to work, you have to treat it seriously. Not like a game, not like a trick. You have to mean it. The action must match your internal voice. If you say, "I've decided," but your body still clings to the back and forth, your mind will know the truth. This is why the ritual must be grounded, physical, intentional. It's not about the action, it's about the authority behind it. You are the one who decides when a thought is done, not the thought itself, not the fear, you. That is the Stoic way, to act from principle, not from panic, to make a choice based on reason and then carry it out with discipline. If the consequences come, you adjust, but you don't torture yourself before they arrive. That's not responsibility, it's wasted energy. Here's something few talk about. Indecision doesn't just drain time, it drains self-respect. Every time you revisit a closed door, you tell yourself you can't be trusted. You weaken your internal leadership. A decision-cleansing ritual rebuilds that trust. It reminds you that even if the outcome is imperfect, the act of choosing was powerful. You acted from your values. You acted from clarity, and that is enough. The Stoics practiced this on the deepest level. They chose to face death daily in their thoughts, not to be dark, but to live with sharp intention. They didn't obsess over whether their plans would succeed. They asked only, is this aligned with virtue? Is this aligned with what is mine to control? And once the answer was yes, they acted. That's the framework you build through ritual. You stop asking whether the decision feels good, and you start asking whether it fits your principles. Then you finalize it. You draw the line. You let it go. Even modern science supports this. Cognitive studies show that decision fatigue is real. The brain burns energy with every pending choice. The more decisions you leave half-finished, the more scattered and exhausted you feel. Your mental energy isn't infinite. Use it with precision. Use it with intention. Cleanse what's done so you can focus on what matters now. One powerful tool is writing a decision letter to yourself. Not a journal entry, a declaration. Write the choice. Write why you made it. Write the values behind it. Then seal it. Put it away. Return to it only if your circumstances, not your fear, have changed. This turns your decision into a commitment. It honors the clarity you fought to find. If your ritual includes speaking the decision out loud, make it direct. No soft language. Say it with certainty. You don't need to feel brave to act bravely. You just need to follow through. Another method is future locking. You decide something, then commit your future self to that choice. For example, you set an alarm titled, "Trust the decision you made," for the next morning. Or schedule a message to yourself reminding you why you chose. This isn't avoidance, it's reinforcement. You're teaching your mind to trust the structure, not the swirl. There's also the practice of post-decision silence. Once the ritual ends, you don't speak about the choice again for a set period. An hour, a day, a week. No rehashing, no second-guessing. Silence is the seal. This may feel uncomfortable at first, but it trains restraint. It teaches you to stand inside your own word. The Stoics believed character was not built in thoughts, but in action. Every decision is an act of character, not because it's perfect, but because it reflects your commitment to reason over emotion, to clarity over confusion, to discipline over doubt. And when you practice this over time, something shifts deep within. You no longer obsess over paths not taken. You walk the one you chose. You don't burn energy looking back. You carry your choices with dignity, because each one was made with care and then released. That's what ritual does. It breaks the loop. It frees the mind to move on. It teaches your nervous system to rest after action. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to mean what you say. and say when it's done. The decision doesn't have to feel comfortable to be right, but once it's made, you don't get to live in limbo. That's not clarity, that's self-sabotage. The ritual protects you from that. Choose your ritual. Use it often. Let it close doors with grace. The door behind you must close so the one ahead can open. And now, we walk forward. Once you begin closing loops through deliberate ritual, the noise starts to fade. The constant guessing, the invisible tension that comes from indecision, it all begins to quiet. But even after a choice is made and the mental door is shut, there's still something lingering, something softer, but still sharp. It's the voice that comes after, the internal monologue, the commentary that keeps narrating your life even when there's nothing left to decide. And most of the time, that voice isn't kind. It questions your value. It tells stories about your worth. It plays judge, jury, and executioner over moments that don't need a verdict. It tells you what you should have said, where you should be, how far behind you are. But here's something most people never learn. You don't have to listen to that voice as if it were truth. You can observe it instead. You can watch it without obeying it. And one way to do that, one of the most powerful techniques in both Stoicism and modern cognitive science, is this. Write your thoughts in the third person. It sounds simple, but it shifts everything, because language is more than expression. It's experience. When you write or speak in the third person, you create distance from the thought, not denial, not disconnection, just space. And in that space, you see clearly. The Stoics didn't have psychology degrees, but they understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in Rome, wrote his personal reflections as if coaching a student, not in I language, but in universal terms. He wrote as though he was guiding someone else, because that distance made it easier to be honest, to be fair, to be rational. And that's exactly what this practice gives you. A space where the fog clears, where emotion stops steering the wheel, where thought is no longer the master, just a visitor. When you write your thoughts as if they belong to someone else, you stop identifying with them completely. You create the role of witness. You shift from being inside the thought to watching it walk across the page. Instead of, I failed again, I'm not good enough, it becomes, she thinks she failed. He believes he's not good enough. And that small shift reveals the illusion. It's not a fact. It's just a belief. This practice is not for hiding from yourself. It's for seeing yourself clearly. Because most of the time, what hurts us isn't reality. It's the version of reality we repeat in our head. And we repeat it in the first person. We wrap ourselves in the language of self-blame, fear, shame, confusion. But when you move those thoughts outside yourself, even for a moment, you see them for what they are: mental events, not absolute truth, just thoughts. And thoughts can be wrong. Writing in third person also changes how your nervous system reacts. When you say, I'm overwhelmed, your body hears a direct command. It responds with tension. But when you write, she feels overwhelmed right now, the urgency softens. There's space to breathe. You're no longer trapped in the identity of the feeling. You're observing a moment, not drowning in it. This is how you interrupt the fusion between thought and self. It's the difference between saying, I am anxious, and saying, she is experiencing anxiety right now. One implies permanence and identity. The other recognizes a passing state. The Stoics practiced this without needing therapy. They called it perspective. They believed wisdom came from stepping back and seeing life as it is, not as your emotions temporarily describe it. When you make a habit of writing your inner dialogue this way, you start building a new relationship with yourself. A relationship that is less reactive and more balanced, because it's easier to give advice than to take it. But when you write your thoughts as if they belong to a close friend, someone you care about, you can suddenly see the distortion. You wouldn't speak to them the way you speak to yourself. You wouldn't judge them as harshly. You wouldn't dismiss their efforts. And that's where the power lies, in rewriting the tone of your mind. When you read what you wrote in third person, it sounds less threatening, less urgent, less fixed. Your mind slows down because you're not fueling it with internal drama. You're translating the moment into something your wiser self can actually respond to. This approach also helps you detect patterns. When you write your thoughts as if observing someone else, you start to notice which themes repeat. You may see how often the voice in your head reverts to guilt or comparison or catastrophizing. But because you've created distance, you can see it with compassion, not panic. You can start asking better questions. What does she need right now? Why does he think this thought matters so much? These questions shift you into a problem-solving state instead of a survival state. And it's not just for emotional moments. Even in planning, reflection, or processing success, the third-person method brings clarity. When you write, "He achieved something difficult today, and he still feels unsure why it doesn't feel like enough," you're naming the emotional contradiction. You're giving form to the internal confusion. And once it's in form, it can be worked with, honored, released. This method becomes even more powerful when spoken aloud. Try reading your journal entries back in the third person. Listen to them like you would a friend. Would you agree with every word? Would you challenge some of it? Would you comfort, advise? This mental reframe builds your inner guide, the part of you that responds, not reacts, the part that leads, not fears. And don't worry about sounding robotic or weird. You're not performing. You're practicing self-command. Marcus Aurelius would repeat truths to himself, not because he needed to hear them once, but because repetition builds roots. You have power over your mind, he reminded himself again and again. You do too, and writing in third person makes that power visible. The habit is especially helpful when preparing for difficult situations. Instead of rehearsing fear in first person, try reframing the situation. He is about to walk into an unknown space. He's done this before. He will breathe slowly. He will respond clearly. He doesn't need to impress, only to be present. This doesn't remove fear. It calms the noise. It activates the part of your mind that's grounded, deliberate, steady. Over time, you may notice that this technique also rewires how you think silently. Even your automatic thoughts may start to take on a more distant, neutral tone. Not because you're suppressing emotion, but because you've trained perspective. You've taught yourself to move from reaction to reflection. This is the Stoic goal, not to escape life, but to engage it wisely. And wisdom grows when you see clearly. Writing in third person removes the fog. You stop assuming every thought is useful. You start seeing which ones are just noise. You learn to treat your inner world like a student, not a dictator. You begin to parent yourself, firmly but gently, with clarity, with compassion, with reason. There's also a deeper transformation that takes place. When you speak to yourself this way, consistently, you build a new narrative, one that's not defined by failure or fear, one that evolves with your actions. You stop being the story of your mistakes and start becoming the story of your growth. Not because everything is easy, but because everything is now seen with fuller vision. And what's more, you create a place to return to, a place in your notebook, in your voice, in your mental language, where honesty lives without shame, where thought is heard but not obeyed, where clarity is practiced through language. The Stoics believed that philosophy was not just reading, it was living. This is how you live it, not by thinking perfectly, but by thinking with discipline. So the next time the thoughts come rushing in, try this. Sit down, pick up a pen, and instead of writing, "I can't handle this," write, "He believes he can't handle this right now." You'll feel the pressure lessen immediately. The moment you name the thought as something outside your core identity, you begin to see what's true and what's just habit. Continue the practice, especially when it feels hard, especially when the noise is loud. Write it out in third person. Let your calm inner voice speak back to it. Read it, reread it. Let it teach you how to lead yourself through chaos, not by control, but by clarity. And then, take that clarity into your day. Use it not just to feel better, but to choose better, to respond more wisely, to speak more honestly, to live with more awareness. This is how the Stoics trained. This is how they led themselves, not through force, through perspective. You can do the same. Start with your words. Watch how your thoughts follow. As you begin to observe your inner dialogue from the outside, something clicks. The grip of thoughts loosens. You stop reacting to every voice in your head as if it's a final truth. But then comes the real test. Not the thought itself, but your urge to respond to it. The emotion it brings. The impulse to speak too soon, act too fast, or escape too quickly. Because even when your thinking becomes clearer, your reflexes remain conditioned. That's where the next practice becomes essential. There's a moment between thought and action that determines everything. That space is where your strength is tested. Not in the intensity of your feeling, but in your ability to pause. Not to deny what you feel, but to delay what you do with it. This is where the 10-minute delay rule becomes a quiet weapon against chaos. The 10-minute delay is not a distraction technique. It's a discipline, a small but powerful habit that teaches your body to stop obeying the first wave of emotion. Not because the emotion is bad, but because it's rarely complete. Emotions often come fast, but wisdom does not. And when you respond immediately to your feelings, you are giving away the very control you've been working so hard to reclaim. The Stoics understood this deeply. They believed that the wise man is not without emotion, but he is not ruled by it. Seneca wrote that anger is like a fire from a single spark. It consumes everything when left unchecked. But if you pause even briefly, the flame often dies out on its own. This is the principle behind the 10-minute delay. You give the impulse time to settle before you choose your next step. This doesn't mean you ignore what you feel. It means you acknowledge it fully and then wait. You allow space for clarity to join the conversation. You don't answer the thought, write the message, or make the decision while your nervous system is still sounding the alarm. You give your system a chance to reset, and you give your reasoning mind time to return to the front seat. It's easy to think 10 minutes won't matter, but in many situations, it's everything. In those 10 minutes, your mind shifts out of survival mode, your body slows down, your thoughts go from urgent to manageable. What once felt like a demand becomes a choice, and in that shift, your dignity is preserved. It works because the brain's initial reaction is almost always emotional. It interprets situations through habit and memory. But when you pause, even for a few minutes, the brain begins to involve the parts responsible for long-term thinking, for consequences, for context. That delay reactivates your ability to choose rather than react. This applies across situations. Whether you're tempted to say something out of anger, send a message you'll later regret, indulge in something destructive, or make a decision from panic, the rule holds. Step back. Set a timer. Let the urge wash over you. Don't resist it, but don't obey it. Watch it. Wait. Let it pass through without attaching to it. The impulse might still be there after 10 minutes, but now you are different. You've proven you can wait, that you are not the same as your emotion. You've reclaimed your role as the one who decides, and this strengthens you more than you can measure in the moment. It rewires your relationship with discomfort. It teaches you that urgency is not truth. It's just speed. Most people live on that speed. They call it passion. They confuse reactivity with authenticity. But the Stoics aimed for something more powerful: intentional living. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a man's worth is measured by what he allows to disturb him. The delay is how you measure your response, not by what you feel, but by what you choose to express. The discipline also gives you time to hear what lies beneath the first wave. Often, anger hides sadness. Urgency hides fear. Defensiveness hides shame. But you don't see that until the storm clears. And storms don't clear by reacting into them. They clear by sitting through the noise, breathing through the weight, letting the emotion name itself fully before you speak on its behalf. And it's not about perfection. You won't always wait 10 minutes. Some days, even 1 minute will feel like resistance. But every small delay builds the muscle of restraint. And restraint is not suppression, it's freedom. The freedom to not be pulled like a puppet by every passing sensation. The freedom to let something inside you rise without giving it the microphone. You can make the delay easier by creating small rituals around it. When the impulse comes, stand up and stretch. Step outside, drink a glass of water slowly. Read one page from a favorite book. Walk to the other side of the room. Write one sentence down. These aren't distractions, they're bridges. They move you from the limbic reaction to the grounded response. You're teaching your system to hold the tension without exploding. And you'll notice something remarkable. Over time, the urge loses some of its power just because it knows it won't be obeyed immediately. The mind starts offering gentler suggestions instead of demands. It begins to trust you. And that trust is what makes space for wisdom to grow. This also works in relationships. When someone says something sharp and your instinct is to defend or retaliate, wait, count 10 breaths. Step out of the room if needed. The delay saves not just the moment, but the relationship. Because once words are spoken, they can't be pulled back. The Stoics believed the tongue must be trained even more than the mind, and the best training is silence. Not silence as suppression, silence as strategy. You delay to protect what matters. The rule is also effective in solitude. When the urge arises to overthink, to obsess, to control what cannot be controlled, wait. Let the urge sit in front of you. Let it spin. Let it tremble. But don't move toward it. You don't need to argue with it. You don't need to chase it. You just need to wait until it loses interest, until it forgets why it was loud in the first place. Even in decision-making, the delay gives clarity. Not because you gather more facts, but because you see the facts with a calmer lens. The rushed decision almost always favors fear or ego, but the delayed decision often favors alignment. It's not about waiting forever. It's about waiting just long enough for the mind to return to its seat and the storm to leave the stage. This practice is especially useful for habits you're trying to break. When the craving hits, pause. Don't try to shame it away. Just pause. Wait 10 minutes. Watch the wave rise and fall. Cravings often burn hottest in the first few minutes, but they pass. And each time you watch one rise and fall without acting, your confidence builds. You become someone who can be trusted by yourself. And the more you practice this rule, the less you'll need it. Because the brain learns through repetition. The more often you delay an urge, the more your brain expects that delay. Reactivity turns into stability. Panic turns into pause, and over time, the delay becomes second nature. The rule also reveals your real values. When you wait and then still want to do the thing, you can trust the action more, because it wasn't driven by urgency. It wasn't born from a reaction. It came from presence. And presence is where real choices are made, not under pressure, but with perspective. This habit doesn't make you passive. It makes you precise. It removes the noise between the signal and the response. It creates a moment where you ask, is this aligned with who I want to be? That question alone is often enough to change the outcome. So the next time you feel the heat rising, the comment you want to fire off, the decision you want to rush, the argument you want to win, stop. Not forever, just 10 minutes. Let the thought breathe. Let the emotion soften. Let yourself choose with eyes open instead of fists clenched. This is not denial. It's discipline. It's how the Stoics moved through life with less regret and more presence. They understood that mastery wasn't in what you felt, but in what you did next. The delay is not a trick. It's a form of respect. Respect for your own clarity. Respect for others' humanity. Respect for the peace you've worked so hard to build. Hold the pause. Let it shape you. And when the 10 minutes pass, choose with strength, not because you were told, but because you know. You waited, you listened, you led. That is how control returns. That is how stillness becomes power. After practicing the 10-minute delay, you begin to notice how much easier it is to step back. The impulse isn't always as loud. The urgency fades. You learn to wait without collapsing into reactivity. But not all thoughts disappear with time. Some stick around, not because they need to be solved immediately, but because your mind refuses to let them go. And not out of clarity, but out of fear, you'll forget. So instead of silence, you stay in the loop. The next step then is not fighting the thought, but storing it, shelving it with awareness, giving it a place so your mind doesn't carry it everywhere. This is where the practice of a mental thought repo becomes powerful. It's not distraction, it's delegation. You're not denying the thought, you're simply postponing it. You're telling your mind, this matters, but not now. You are not erasing the concern, you are removing its authority over the present moment. You're building an intentional system to hold thoughts for later, so you can return to the moment with presence. Your mind is like a working desk. When too many open files are scattered across it, you can't focus. Everything feels urgent. But when each file has a place, when you trust that you'll return to what matters later, focus sharpens. That's what this practice gives you. the ability to free your mind without losing what's important. The Stoics valued clarity above all. Epictetus reminded his students to keep what matters in view and to release what does not. But modern life blurs that line. Our thoughts are layered with tasks, questions, emotions, memories. And many of them rise up not because they're useful, but because they're loud. When you don't pause to filter them, you end up giving equal attention to what's urgent and what's random. A mental repo is a structured pause. You decide clearly and calmly, this thought does not belong in this moment. But instead of pushing it away, you store it. You can write it down, speak it into a voice note, or place it on a mental shelf with intention. It's not forgotten. It's simply benched. This tells your mind, we're not avoiding, we're reprioritizing. One way to start this practice is by noticing repeated thoughts. If a thought keeps resurfacing, interrupting your focus, pause and ask, does this need my full attention right now? If the answer is no, place it in your mental queue. The act of consciously choosing when to engage gives your mind the rest it rarely gets. You no longer feel pulled in 5 directions. You've created a waiting room for your mind. And just knowing the thought is safely stored gives you permission to release it. The power in this practice is that you're training discernment. Not every thought deserves airtime. Not every emotion requires a full analysis. Some things just need to wait. And when you choose that delay consciously, your confidence grows. You begin to trust your inner system. You stop chasing every distraction in fear of forgetting something important. This isn't detachment from life, it's intelligent focus. It's the discipline of separating thinking time from living time. It's how you create mental clarity without ignoring responsibility. A mental repo doesn't say never, it says not now. And that space gives you your energy back. To make this habit real, you can create a physical thought list, a notebook or digital document where you store concerns, ideas, and unresolved thoughts. Review it later, once or twice a day, when you're not reactive. This tells your subconscious that you have a system, that nothing is being lost. You are in charge, and that allows the rest of your thoughts to quiet down. This technique also helps reduce mental fatigue. Most mental exhaustion doesn't come from doing hard tasks. It comes from holding too many unsolved thoughts in your head at once. When you shelve thoughts intentionally, your cognitive load drops. Your decisions get sharper. Your conversations become more present. You stop bringing unrelated stress into unrelated moments. There's a deeper level to this too. Some thoughts aren't tasks or reminders. They're emotional loops. Doubts, fears, regrets. They don't need solutions right away. They need rest. And when you try to resolve them while emotionally charged, you only tighten the knot. A mental repo gives those thoughts a cooling period. You say, I will return when I'm calm, and often when you do return, the urgency is gone. The thought that once screamed now speaks gently, or sometimes not at all. This works because the mind, like the body, responds to structure. When you give it a pattern, store this, revisit at X time, it stops panicking. It knows it's been heard, and feeling heard is often all the mind needs to stop interrupting. You can also create categories in your mental repo: personal concerns, work questions, creative ideas, emotional reflections. Having labeled containers helps the brain process more cleanly. It's like building mental folders. You're not pushing anything away. You're organizing your access. You're deciding when and where to meet the thought instead of letting it appear randomly and dominate your mental state. This practice trains patience. Instead of reacting to every thought the moment it arises, you begin to treat thoughts like visitors. You listen politely. You decide if the timing is right. If it's not, you ask them to wait. This isn't coldness, it's inner leadership. It's choosing alignment over chaos. The Stoics would approve. They believed emotional health wasn't about elimination, but about placement. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you must look at each thought and ask, is this necessary? The repo gives you the chance to ask that question from a calm place, not in the heat of the moment. Even the act of saying out loud, I will revisit this later, changes the brain's chemistry. You are activating your executive function. You're pulling yourself out of emotional reflex and into structured choice. And the more you do this, the more automatic it becomes. Thought shows up. You assess, you shelve, you return when ready. This also protects your relationships. How often have you brought a stress from one part of life into another simply because you didn't shelve it? An unresolved task invades dinner. A conversation plays in your head during rest. When you use a repo, you respect your time and others. You stay mentally present because you trust that nothing's been lost, just temporarily set aside. And it works with your own emotional processing too. Some thoughts are too raw to resolve now. You're not avoiding them, you're creating space. The kind of space where your nervous system can catch up. You write the thought down. You schedule a time to revisit it. You make it official. And in doing so, you reduce the anxiety that comes from carrying emotional weight without support. A helpful extension of this is the scheduled revisit. Set aside a daily or weekly window for your thought repo. Open it, review, and decide. Does this still matter? Does it need action, reflection, or release? You'll often find that many of the thoughts no longer hold the power they did. They've shrunk, or they've clarified, or they've become irrelevant. That's the gift of time and space. This approach doesn't make you cold, it makes you strategic. You stop letting thoughts dictate your energy. You start creating deliberate boundaries around your mental focus. This is not indifference, it's protection of your peace. There is also a deep Stoic thread here, the understanding that your time is not infinite. The mind will fill as much space as you give it, but your energy is limited. Your attention is precious. You cannot solve every thought in real time. And you don't need to. You just need to choose when and how to meet them. This practice is especially helpful during stress spikes. When your brain feels full, your chest tight, your concentration fragmented, pause. Write everything down that's spinning in your head. Don't try to fix it, just get it out, then set it aside. Tell yourself, later. Let your body feel that release. Let the space in your mind return. And the more you practice this, the more you'll see how many thoughts were simply noise. Repetitions, loops, not problems, just habits. Once they're shelved, they stop demanding your attention. You free up your clarity, your creativity, your calm. The thought repo isn't just about control, it's about relief. It's how you step out of survival mode and back into focus. You can care without being consumed. You can think without being ruled. You can pause the thought without dishonoring it. That's the balance. That's the practice. Not escape, just placement. Not suppression, just timing. You hold the thought. You store it with care. You move forward. And when you're ready, you return, calm, clear, in control. Once you begin shelving thoughts intentionally, something changes inside you. There's less panic in letting go. You no longer chase every mental thread out of fear it will disappear. You give your mind a signal, not now, but not forgotten. But even with the best thought repose, there are thoughts that return again and again. They drift back in during quiet moments. They rise without warning, soft but persistent, not urgent enough to solve immediately, but too unresolved to fully forget. They linger like open tabs, whispering in the background. These are the thoughts that need a different kind of space, not a solution, not a rush to fix, just a home, a place to be witnessed, recorded, and set down. This is where the practice of keeping an unfinished business journal becomes essential. An unfinished business journal is not a problem-solving tool. It's a container for everything your mind hasn't finished processing. It's a place for questions without answers, feelings without resolution, stories that haven't found closure. It gives your mind permission to rest without forcing finality. You're not asking yourself to fix everything. You're asking yourself to honor what still needs time. There's power in naming what's unresolved. When you write it down, you tell your nervous system, "This exists, I see it, I'm not ignoring it." And just that recognition can lower the tension. It stops the thought from chasing your attention all day. You've placed it somewhere safe. Your mind doesn't need to repeat it. You don't need to revisit it unless you choose to. This is especially helpful with emotional clutter. The half conversations you never finished, the decisions you postponed, the relationships that left behind questions, the roles you're still carrying, even though they've already changed. These don't go away just because you don't think about them. They store themselves in your body, your tone, your sleep. The journal gives them form so they don't stay stuck in feeling. You can write one line, a single sentence that names what's unfinished. I still don't know if I made the right choice last year. There's tension between me and my brother I haven't addressed. I don't know why I still feel like I'm behind. No judgment, no pressure, just honesty. The journal doesn't ask you to fix it. It just asks you to stop pretending it doesn't exist. This builds emotional honesty. You no longer need to act as if everything's clear. You make peace with the gray areas, the open loops, the questions that might stay open longer than you'd like. And from that acceptance, new clarity often grows, not because you forced it, but because you made room for it. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that clarity wasn't the absence of confusion. It was the courage to face it without fear. Seneca wrote that we must not be disturbed by what is unclear, but rather face it with steady attention. The journal gives you a place to hold that attention without getting lost in it. It also helps with the illusion of mental completeness. Many people feel exhausted not because of what they're doing, but because of what they haven't processed. The unfinished emails, the unspoken truths, the decisions that were half made but never closed. These pile up mentally, but when you write them down, you separate them from your identity. They stop being part of your mood. They become part of a page. This shift lowers internal pressure. You're no longer telling yourself that everything must be fixed now. You're no longer faking calm by pushing things out of awareness. You're saying, "This is real. I'm not ready to solve it yet, but I'm strong enough to hold it." That's a different kind of strength, a still, quiet strength. The journal is also a practice of focus, because when you place unresolved thoughts on paper, you free your mind to be present elsewhere. You no longer carry half-built stories into unrelated moments. You reduce mental leakage. You stay cleaner in your thinking. And when it's time to return to those entries, you do so with choice, not compulsion. What's powerful about this habit is that it becomes a signal to your brain. You're teaching it. Unresolved does not mean unsafe. You stop tying your peace to immediate answers. You build tolerance for open questions, and that makes you more flexible, more grounded, more capable of moving through complex emotions without losing your center. Your unfinished business journal can also reveal patterns over time. As you read past entries, you'll notice what themes keep returning. You might see that certain insecurities show up in different forms, that some conflicts repeat not because of others, but because of your own unspoken fears. This isn't criticism, it's insight. It helps you grow without shame. This journal is not for productivity. It's for presence. It's not a to-do list. It's a to-acknowledge list. You are not listing what must be completed. You are honoring what your mind is still holding. And that act alone brings a kind of mental and emotional release that no external success can offer. Sometimes writing the thought is enough. Other times you'll want to come back later and explore it further. That's your choice. You don't owe every entry a conclusion, but you owe each one your honesty. You owe yourself the right to not carry it alone. You can create categories within the journal if that helps. Things unsaid, actions avoided, feelings unprocessed, goals incomplete. Each category invites reflection without demand. You're not ranking importance, you're simply creating structure for complexity. And complexity without structure is what creates overwhelm. Use this journal especially when your mind feels busy, but you don't know why. Sit down. Ask yourself, what am I carrying right now that feels incomplete? Let your hand write whatever rises. You might be surprised by what surfaces. Small thoughts with big weight. Old stories you didn't realize still lived in you. This practice also strengthens your decision-making. When you know something is unresolved, but you've placed it somewhere intentionally, you're less likely to make reactive choices out of discomfort. You stop reaching for distractions. You stop numbing confusion with noise. You sit with it clearly and calmly because you know it has a place. It's not swirling in your chest anymore. It's resting on paper. The process brings dignity to thought, not because you solve it, but because you face it. Most people don't need more answers. They need more space to be honest with what they don't know yet. The unfinished business journal is that space. Over time, you'll notice you feel lighter, not because your life got simpler, but because your relationship to uncertainty shifted. You'll stop craving constant closure. You'll develop the ability to move forward with things unresolved. That's maturity. That's depth. That's freedom. Even your dreams may become clearer, because so much of what clouds the subconscious is just unspoken emotion. You weren't avoiding it. You just didn't know where to put it. Now you do. The page, the practice, the quiet recognition that what's incomplete can still be honored. Use this journal at the end of the day if you feel mentally crowded. Use it at the start of the day if you wake up with heaviness. Use it in the middle of conflict when you can't articulate what you're feeling. Use it whenever clarity feels far away. You don't need the right words. Just write what's real. There is no right format. Paragraphs, lists, scattered phrases, it all counts. What matters is intention. You're not proving anything. You're building a bridge between your inner world and your outer awareness. That bridge becomes a refuge, a map, a place to return to when your mind gets loud. The Stoics knew that peace came not from perfect control, but from disciplined observation. This journal teaches that discipline gently. It gives you a place to meet yourself without performance, without fixing, just being, just holding, just breathing with what's not yet done. In the end, it's not about having all the answers. It's about knowing where your questions live. You can visit them, you can leave them, you can return when ready. That is how you stop being defined by what's unresolved. That is how you stay free, even in the presence of unfinished thoughts. This is the way forward. Quiet, steady, honest. Write what's true, leave it there, walk with less weight, and return only when it serves your peace. After placing your unfinished thoughts somewhere solid, your mind starts to breathe again. You feel lighter, not because you solved everything, but because you stopped forcing yourself to. You begin to realize that clarity often isn't about knowing more. It's about carrying less. But in that new, quiet space, something else becomes clear. Your mind still needs movement, not in circles, not in loops, but in purpose. Mental energy doesn't vanish when you quiet the noise. It needs somewhere to go. Without direction, it will stir old thoughts again just to stay active. The next step is learning how to channel that energy with intention instead of letting it spill into worry. Your mind is designed to solve. It seeks problems because it needs stimulation. When it doesn't find useful ones, it creates them. The key is to stop being passive in that process, to give your brain the challenge it needs before it invents one you don't want. This is where deliberate cognitive load exercises become essential. You engage your attention on purpose, not to distract, but to train. You give your mind something hard and worthwhile to do, so it doesn't return to what's familiar but destructive. There's a sharp difference between reactive overthinking and intentional thinking. Overthinking drains you. Focused thinking strengthens you. When you deliberately choose to challenge your mind, you move it from survival to growth, from wandering to working. This shift rewires the way your brain responds to pressure. You're no longer a prisoner of restlessness. You're its guide. Cognitive load exercises aren't complicated by nature. They're simple but mentally demanding tasks that require attention, strategy, memory, or coordination. The goal is not to win. The goal is to use your mind in a direction that develops it. Puzzles, logic games, math problems, memory drills, strategic planning, these are all tools, not distractions. They help your mind shift gears. They offer friction, and friction builds strength. The Stoics valued mental discipline above comfort. They saw the mind as a muscle that needed to be pushed to stay sharp. Marcus Aurelius wrote about examining thoughts with precision, not letting anything through without challenge. Epictetus trained students to speak, write, and reason every day. They didn't believe the mind should be left idle. They believed idleness invited decay. This practice is not about avoiding emotion. It's about creating structure for mental energy, especially in moments when you feel the urge to ruminate, argue with yourself, or revisit a past decision. Choosing to engage in a mental challenge gives that energy a better home. You are not ignoring what you feel. You are replacing unhealthy loops with focused difficulty. Start small. A daily commitment to a mentally demanding task that holds your attention long enough to shift your internal state. A Sudoku puzzle, a page of logic problems, a single challenging essay to read and explain, a difficult passage to memorize, a chess position to analyze. What matters is the intent, not the type. You are choosing difficulty over drift. What this does over time is retrain your relationship with discomfort. Most people use mental energy only to escape pain. But when you deliberately lean into mental strain, your tolerance expands. You become less reactive to confusion. You stop needing answers right away. You stop collapsing under incomplete information. You learn to hold effort without quitting. That skill transfers everywhere. It also gives you more mental clarity after the task. When you work your mind intentionally, it quiets down naturally after, not because you forced it, but because you gave it closure. This is different from passive stimulation, like scrolling or background noise. Those leave the mind hungry. Focused effort satisfies it. It's like completing a workout. You don't need to move afterward because your muscles were used well. The same applies to thought. You'll also begin to build discipline in starting things you don't feel ready for, because cognitive tasks often come with resistance. The mind will say, later. But the habit of showing up anyway is what builds resilience. You stop waiting for motivation and begin to rely on structure. That's a deeper strength. It's not driven by mood, it's driven by value. These exercises also help prevent mental stagnation. When your thoughts feel repetitive, it's often because your brain hasn't been challenged in a while. You're using the same paths, the same narratives. Introducing novel difficulty forces the mind to adapt. You get creative again. You find new ways of seeing. That's not coincidence. It's the effect of using your mental system the way it was meant to be used, fully, consistently, with purpose. You can vary the challenges depending on your day. When your thoughts are fast and chaotic, choose something that requires precision and patience. When your thoughts feel slow or foggy, choose something that wakes up focus. Over time, you'll learn how each type of challenge impacts your clarity. You'll begin to build a library of tools, mental weights for different kinds of days. One important point: these tasks are not escapes. They are not band-aids. They are training. The goal is not to avoid your emotional reality. It's to strengthen the mind so that when you return to emotional work, you do so with greater clarity and less reactivity. That's how you build endurance. That's how you face real life with less panic and more poise. There's also a grounding effect that comes from using your mental focus fully. You feel more present in your body. Your senses return. Your breathing slows. This isn't accidental. Focus and presence work together. The more you engage your mind fully, the more your nervous system gets the signal that it is safe. You are no longer running. You are here. Even short periods of deliberate effort help. A single 20-minute session can reorient your entire mood, not because the task gave you joy, but because it gave you structure. You stopped floating. You took control of your own mental energy. That act, repeated consistently, builds trust in yourself. You stop being afraid of your own thoughts. You stop letting mood dictate movement. Another benefit: you start seeing time differently. When your day is filled with mental drift, time disappears. You feel tired but unclear. But when you set aside structured periods for focus, time becomes something you shape. You realize that a single focused hour is worth more than 5 hours of scattered thought. You start using time with care. You treat your attention like a resource. As this becomes habit, you begin to link clarity with effort. You don't wait for peace to arrive. You build it through action, and this becomes your way of living, intentional, engaged, and unshaken by momentary noise. The Stoics called this alignment, living in accordance with reason, guided by virtue, grounded in discipline. This is how you get stronger. not by avoiding hard things, but by choosing the right hard things at the right time for the right reason. So when your mind feels restless, when your thoughts start to circle, when clarity fades, don't wait, don't scroll, don't escape. Pick something that demands attention. Choose something just difficult enough that your mind cannot do it while worrying. Stay with it. Work through the resistance. Let your mind sweat. Let your attention do its job. And when you finish, notice the difference. The quiet, the steadiness, the absence of noise. That is not a coincidence. That is the result of control, of self-direction, of using your strength wisely. Deliberate cognitive effort is not about becoming smarter. It's about becoming stronger in the way you manage your inner world. It's how you stop drifting and start choosing. How you move from reaction to intention. How you stop letting restlessness lead. Your mind was made to move, just not in circles. Give it something real to carry, and watch how stillness follows. As you continue practicing deliberate mental effort, you begin to feel a deeper sense of stability within. You're no longer pulled in every direction. You start choosing your focus instead of reacting to whatever shows up. But there's another layer beneath all this, something quieter but just as powerful. Even after effort, even after structure, thoughts still surface. They may not scream like before, but they still want to be heard. And some thoughts, even after all your tools, still confuse you. They feel tangled, complex. You don't know if they're useful, distorted, or just emotionally charged. You need a way to see clearly, not just react, not just store, but understand. This is where the next tool brings depth and precision. When a thought arises that feels heavy, persistent, or unclear, most people either avoid it or spiral into it. They either suppress it out of fear or overanalyze it without structure. Both lead to mental exhaustion. What you need in those moments is a system of clarity, a structured way to understand your thoughts without being overwhelmed by them. That's exactly what the three-lens technique offers. The three-lens technique gives you three separate but connected ways to examine any thought that disrupts your peace: logic, care, and context. Each lens shows you something different. Together, they help you understand what the thought actually is, not just what it feels like. Start with logic. The logic lens asks, is this thought accurate? Is it based on facts, or is it built on assumptions, guesses, or distorted thinking? This isn't about positive thinking. It's about honest thinking. The goal is not to feel better instantly, but to clarify what's true. You don't ask yourself, does this thought comfort me? You ask, does this thought make sense when I examine it calmly? Often thoughts that feel intense are missing evidence. They show up emotionally charged, but without a foundation. When you use the logic lens, you separate the feeling from the statement. They're ignoring me becomes, have they actually ignored me, or am I assuming based on silence? I'm going to fail becomes, have I failed before, or am I afraid because I can't guarantee the outcome? This kind of questioning doesn't erase emotion. It invites balance. You start seeing how many thoughts fall apart when placed under logical light. They shrink because they were never as solid as they felt. They were built on guesses, not facts. The logic lens teaches your brain that not every thought deserves belief. That emotion can speak without being accurate. This is how you stop giving mental energy to noise. But logic alone isn't enough. Some thoughts are logically weak but emotionally strong. That's where the second lens becomes essential: care. The care lens asks, what is this thought trying to protect? What wound or fear is it connected to? You're not analyzing the thought's truth here. You're honoring its purpose. Even irrational thoughts come from somewhere. They often try to guard something tender, even if they do it clumsily. For example, a thought like, "I can't trust anyone," might be illogical in general, but under the care lens, it reveals an old betrayal or unresolved pain. You begin to see the emotion behind the story. This is not self-pity. This is emotional honesty. You stop labeling your thoughts as bad and start listening to what part of you feels unsafe. You begin building a deeper relationship with your own inner world. Using the care lens doesn't mean you agree with the thought. It means you listen without judging yourself. You say, "This thought is harsh, but maybe it's trying to protect me from being disappointed again." That softens your resistance. You're not pushing the thought away or indulging it blindly. You're understanding where it comes from, so it doesn't have to scream to be heard. This builds emotional maturity, the ability to hold pain without panicking, to face discomfort without escaping. You begin to develop self-compassion that isn't built on affirmations, but on understanding. You're not telling yourself that everything's okay. You're reminding yourself that it's okay to feel not okay sometimes, and that you can still respond wisely. The third lens is context. This lens asks, where is this thought coming from, and what does the situation look like from a wider perspective? You zoom out. You stop seeing the thought as a standalone truth and start seeing it as part of a bigger pattern. Maybe the thought arises when you're tired, or when you're triggered by a specific kind of stress. Maybe it's louder during change or silence. Context shows you that many thoughts are not about truth at all. They're about timing, environment, or repetition. With this lens, you begin to see your patterns. You might notice that the same doubts appear every time you take a risk, or that guilt rises any time you say no. These thoughts aren't new information. They're echoes, and when you see them as echoes, they lose their command. They don't vanish, but they don't rule. You stop mistaking frequency for importance. Context also helps you factor in your current state. Are you reacting from fear, fatigue, or pressure? Would this thought feel as true if you were rested, centered, or supported? You begin to adjust your response, not based on the thought's volume, but on its setting. This reduces your tendency to overreact. You respond to the moment, not just the feeling. That's what calm people do. Not because they feel less, but because they see more. Using all three lenses together turns confusion into clarity. Logic checks the thought's truth. Care honors the emotion behind it. Context reveals the conditions feeding it. When you move through all three, you find the center. You make decisions with more steadiness. You stop flipping between extremes. You stop chasing thoughts like they're urgent messages. You start investigating them like a wise observer. This practice doesn't take hours. Once you learn the lenses, it becomes quick. A thought hits. You pause. You ask, is it logical? What emotion is underneath? What's the broader context? This sequence builds your response system. It stops you from jumping straight into defense or doubt. You move through understanding before action. The Stoics believed in examining thought rigorously, not for perfection, but for peace. Marcus Aurelius constantly wrote to himself not just about how to feel, but how to think better. He reminded himself that most of his suffering came not from what happened, but from what he told himself about it. The three-lens technique brings that principle to life in a practical, repeatable way. You can write your reflections down, Start a page with a troubling thought, then move through each lens. What are the facts? What might the feeling be trying to tell me? What's happening around me that's influencing how I think? This process externalizes the storm. It brings distance, and in that distance, your decisions become more grounded. Over time, you'll start to notice that fewer thoughts shake you. Not because you feel less, but because you respond with more precision. You stop absorbing every mental voice as if it's sacred. You evaluate, you reflect, you respond. That's clarity in motion. The three-lens technique also sharpens communication. When you understand your own thoughts this clearly, you speak more calmly. You stop projecting confusion onto others. You begin to own your words. You name your feelings without blaming. You speak from what's real, not what's reactive. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to treat your mind with more dignity. Not as something to escape, but something to train. Not as a battlefield, but as a system. You stop fighting yourself. You start understanding what's going on beneath the surface, and that brings peace no affirmation ever could. Let this become part of your routine. Don't wait for the big breakdown. Use it in the small waves. When you notice irritation, self-doubt, hesitation, pause. Run the lenses. Look deeper. Speak kindly to yourself through each stage. The thought isn't the problem. The problem is when you believe it without checking. This tool gives you the space to check, to slow down, to think through. That's how you earn mental clarity. Not by controlling thoughts, but by understanding them. Not by being positive all the time, but by being honest enough to investigate what you think and steady enough to hold whatever you find. The next time a thought feels heavy, don't react. Step back. Ask. Explore. Then respond. Not from fear, but from insight. Not from habit, but from awareness. That's how the Stoic sees the world. That's how the wise live. And that's the clarity you've been seeking. Not outside you, but inside, waiting to be seen with the right lens. After learning to examine thoughts through logic, care, and context, you begin to recognize the shape of your own mind more clearly. You're no longer overwhelmed by the first wave of emotion. You've gained the ability to pause, to ask better questions, to see thoughts as information rather than commands. But even with this clarity, some thoughts still try to force themselves through. They insist they're true. They press harder. They repeat with confidence, hoping repetition will become proof. These are the thoughts that don't shrink when questioned gently. They need something firmer. Not aggression, structure, not repression, evaluation. This is where the practice of the imaginary thought court becomes useful. It's a deliberate mental process that puts intrusive, repetitive, or distressing thoughts through a structured trial. You take on the role of judge, prosecutor, defense, and witness. You don't argue emotionally. You evaluate systematically. You treat your thought like a claim, and like any serious claim, it must be supported by evidence, tested under pressure, and compared against reason. No thought is above examination, not even the ones that feel personal. The reason this works is simple. Your brain often accepts thoughts without evidence, especially ones soaked in emotion. Fear-based thoughts enter without resistance. They feel urgent, so the brain assumes they must be valid. But emotional intensity is not the same as truth. The thought court breaks that illusion. It shows that not everything which feels real is grounded in fact. To begin the process, pick one recurring thought that seems to dominate your mental space. The more persistent and emotionally charged, the better. Write the thought down as a clear statement, like a formal accusation. Treat it as if someone else presented it. This distance helps you evaluate it without being consumed by it. Write it clearly. I always mess things up. No one respects me. I'll never succeed. Label it without softening the edges. Let it stand. Next, step into the role of the prosecutor. This is the voice that presents the thought as truth. Write down every piece of evidence that supports the thought. Facts, patterns, examples, anything your mind uses to justify it. Be honest. Don't hold back. Let the prosecutor make the strongest case it can. This is where the thought shows its full force. Let it be loud. Let it be convincing. This step helps you uncover the narrative behind the thought. It's no longer vague. It's exposed. Then step into the role of the defense, not to dismiss the thought, but to question its certainty. Write down counter-evidence, times the opposite was true. Alternative explanations, missing context. Any moment that weakens the original claim. You are not trying to lie to yourself. You're trying to make the courtroom balanced. You are not here to blindly comfort. You are here to introduce full context. The goal is not to feel good. The goal is to uncover what's true. Now enter the role of the witness. Look at the situation neutrally. Ask what an outside observer would see. How would someone else interpret the same thought with no emotional stake? What would a rational friend say? What would someone who cares about you see that you don't? This witness helps create emotional distance. The more objective you can be in this role, the more clarity you'll build. After all sides have spoken, return to the role of the judge. Review both arguments. Weigh the strength of the evidence. Notice if the thought holds up under examination or if it begins to collapse. Many times, thoughts that felt certain in your head will fall apart when put on trial. You'll see exaggeration, gaps, emotional distortion. You'll begin to feel the difference between what is assumed and what is proven. This process doesn't need to happen on paper every time. Once practiced, it becomes internal. You feel a thought rise. You pause. You mentally switch roles. You challenge the claim instead of surrendering to it. This doesn't erase discomfort, but it prevents it from turning into self-destruction. The Stoics believed strongly in this kind of mental testing. They questioned not just their reactions, but the thoughts underneath. They separated impressions from truth. Epictetus taught that just because a thought enters your mind doesn't mean it belongs there. You must interrogate it. You must evaluate it. You must examine whether it helps you live with virtue, clarity, and strength. Thought court is not about being detached. It's about being precise. You are not rejecting your feelings. You're creating a space where they can be understood in full light, not in panic. And this space, this methodical process, is what teaches the mind to respect reason more than reaction. The benefit of this practice is not just mental quiet, it's confidence. You begin to trust your ability to face uncomfortable thoughts without collapsing. You stop fearing your own mind. You become someone who doesn't need to suppress or ignore, but someone who evaluates and leads. There's also a longer-term benefit. As you keep running your thoughts through this court, your brain begins to change. It stops throwing out the same claims without thought. It starts offering more reasoned, balanced assessments. You are rewiring your pattern of thought from default reaction to mindful investigation. That is long-term cognitive growth. This practice is especially helpful when facing thoughts rooted in shame or unworthiness. These thoughts often feel like facts, but when put on trial, they often show their weakness. Shame rarely survives careful questioning. It depends on vagueness, on repetition, on being unchallenged. Once you require it to give evidence, it often stumbles. You begin to see that most self-judgment is not based on reality. It's based on old wounds, untested beliefs, and misplaced blame. Thought court also helps with external conflicts. When you're upset by someone's words or actions, you can examine your interpretation. You place the belief, "They were trying to hurt me," or "They don't respect me," into the trial. Let all sides speak. Introduce multiple perspectives. Weigh emotional reactions against facts. This doesn't mean excusing harm. It means not jumping to conclusions that only increase your suffering. What makes this method powerful is that it forces mental responsibility. You are no longer letting your thoughts write your reality unchecked. You are choosing what to believe based on clarity, not just emotion. You're not being cold, you're being clear. The structure also keeps you from spiraling. Most overthinking feeds itself because it never ends. The mind loops without resolution. Thought court creates a beginning and an end, a container, a process. Once the trial concludes, you make a ruling. You decide, does this thought deserve action? Does it require change, or does it need to be released? You don't leave the thought open-ended, you bring it to closure. That mental closure protects your energy. You can even assign a verdict to the thought. Proven, disproven, partially true, distorted, emotionally charged, but inaccurate. Labeling it helps reduce its influence. The thought may return, but now it returns with a history. You've already tested it. You don't need to take it seriously again. This builds a new kind of resilience, not from avoidance, but from skill. You become someone who can face discomfort directly, question it fully, and respond to it wisely. This is the Stoic way. Not to be free from disturbance, but to respond with discernment when disturbance comes. Some thoughts will hold up under trial. That's okay. Not every thought is false. But even then, the trial gives you clarity. It shows you why it matters. It helps you name what action is needed. You're no longer lost in confusion. You're making an informed choice. Repeat this process often. Start with one thought per day. Let it be simple or complex. With practice, it becomes second nature. You stop absorbing every worry and start examining them. You stop drowning in emotion and start organizing it. You stop reacting to your thoughts like an audience member and start directing them like a leader. The mind is loud. It will always produce noise. But you get to choose what passes as truth. You get to decide what shapes your beliefs. You are not your first thought. You are the thinker behind the thought, the judge, the investigator, the one who holds the gavel. Use it carefully, consistently, honestly, and let your clarity grow from the discipline of truth, not from comfort, but from courage. That's what it means to be mentally free, not untouched by thoughts, but unruled by them. You've learned how to bring thoughts to trial. Now, you lead from the verdict. Once you've learned how to put your thoughts on trial and test their weight, something inside you changes. You stop treating mental noise like a truth you have to obey. You realize that most thoughts are just passing commentary, and you no longer fear them in the same way. But even when you're mentally sharp, even when your thoughts are calmer, the body still holds tension. You've done the internal work, but the mind and body are never separate. Sometimes what looks like mental fog is simply the body begging for movement. Not intense exercise, not big routines, just small shifts that bring oxygen back to focus, back to presence, back to clarity. This is where micro-movement mind clearing becomes essential. These are subtle, low-effort physical actions that restore mental sharpness when your mind feels sluggish, scattered, or drained. They don't require a gym or schedule. They don't demand motivation. They're accessible, simple, and effective because they work with your nervous system instead of against it. When you feel stuck mentally, it's often a sign that something in the body isn't flowing. Breath, blood, posture, or subtle tension. You don't always need a new strategy. Sometimes you just need to move. The purpose of micro-movement is not to burn energy, it's to reset awareness. These are the small signals you send to your brain that tell it you are alive, present, and grounded. Think of it as clearing the static without needing to change the channel, a stretch of the fingers, a roll of the shoulders, a shift in how you sit, a slow head turn. These aren't dramatic acts, but they change the way your brain receives input. They pull you out of your looping thoughts and reconnect you with the physical present. When the mind becomes overloaded with information, it often disconnects from the body. You start living in your head. Your awareness shrinks to thought alone. This disconnection creates mental fatigue, not because your thoughts are heavy, but because your nervous system isn't anchored. Movement reconnects the system. Even the smallest action can pull you out of cognitive overload and return you to clarity. The Stoics understood that physical discipline supported mental strength. They practiced not just temperance in thought, but also control over the body. They believed in walking, in breathwork, in stillness balanced by motion. Their teachings weren't theoretical, they were grounded in practice, and that's what micro-movement is, a practical form of grounding. You can begin with breath-led motion. Take a slow, deep breath, and as you exhale, stretch your hands open. Not for exercise, just for sensation. Feel the air in your lungs, the expansion of your ribs, the flex of your fingers. This simple act brings your mind back to your body. It reminds you that thinking is not your only way of being. Another form is progressive shifting. Move one joint at a time. Neck, shoulders, wrists, ankles. Rotate each gently with awareness. This is not about doing it perfectly, it's about breaking stillness without force. Movement like this resets your mental loop by interrupting the still frame of a frozen posture. It reminds the body that it has agency, that you're not stuck, that something can change. Posture itself is a powerful micro-movement. When you slump or tense, your body sends signals of defeat or stress to the brain. A slight posture correction, lifting your chest, lengthening your spine, softening your jaw, can shift your emotional state. Not because posture fixes everything, but because it helps you exit the collapse that stress often creates. The body doesn't lie, and when you align it, the mind follows. Even standing up briefly can act as a reset. If you've been sitting in one position for too long, the mental haze isn't from thought, it's from stagnation. Standing sends blood to different areas of the brain. Your senses recalibrate. Your awareness expands. This is why people often pace when deep in thought. It's the body's natural way of processing complexity through motion. You can also use movement to discharge tension. Tapping your fingers, shaking out your hands, stretching your toes inside your shoes. Small, rhythmic motions give the nervous system a way to release energy without drama. You don't need to scream into a pillow or go for a run. You can just move one part of yourself with intention. Let it release. Let it soften the inner noise. When used regularly, micro-movement becomes a silent practice of self-regulation. It gives you a method to reset focus without needing full isolation or distraction. It allows you to stay in the moment without mentally running away. You no longer feel the need to check out. You simply shift, slightly, and return. This practice is especially helpful during mental transitions, between tasks, before a difficult conversation, after consuming heavy information. These are the moments when your system needs to reset. A single deep breath and a slow stretch can do more for your focus than scrolling through your phone. One centers you, the other fragments you further. You can even build micro-movements into routines. Before writing, stretch your hands. Before reading, shift your shoulders. Before speaking, release your jaw. Each one signals your brain, reset, engage, be here. These are small rituals with large effects. Over time, your mind begins to associate these movements with focus. They become anchors. This isn't just helpful in calm moments. When your anxiety spikes, when overthinking begins, when you feel like your thoughts are circling, movement breaks the pattern. A slow walk, a full body yawn, a hand to your chest, a roll of your neck. These aren't escapes, they're messages. You're reminding your nervous system that it doesn't need to collapse under the weight of thought. It has options. It can move. This practice can also be used preventively. Don't wait until you're overwhelmed. Use small movements throughout the day to stay clear, especially if your work requires extended mental effort. Let the body support the mind. Don't expect stillness to create clarity when you've ignored your physical state for too long. Micro-movement also reconnects you with the present moment. When you're lost in mental time, regretting the past, fearing the future, your body stays here. And movement reminds you of that. It pulls you back to now. You don't need to force presence. You just need to feel your limbs again. Even subtle movements like gently pressing your feet into the floor or bringing awareness to your breath at the bottom of your lungs count. There's no hierarchy here. Movement is not about intensity, it's about intention. If your intention is to return to awareness, the movement becomes a tool for clarity. You can also layer movement with attention training. Focus on the texture of an object as you move your fingers over it. Bring your attention to the way your shoulders rise when you breathe. Combine motion with sensation. This kind of micro-attention rewires the brain. It builds the muscle of focus, not through thought, but through experience. The Stoics taught that philosophy should be lived, not just discussed, and movement is part of that life. They walked to think. They trained their bodies to endure so their minds would follow. Their stillness was not passive. It was built through action. You can do the same, not by forcing strength, but by letting movement help you return to calm. Even creative clarity improves through movement. When you step away from a stuck moment and stretch, ideas begin to reconnect. New thoughts surface, solutions rise, not because you tried harder, but because you allowed space, and movement creates space. This practice is especially effective when paired with breath. Breath is the one rhythm always available. Combine it with a shift of posture, a stretch, a brief stand. Let them support each other. Let them rebuild your presence from the inside out. Even 1 minute of micro-movement with breath can break a full hour of mental looping. Use this often. You don't need to explain it to anyone. You don't need permission. Just move. Small, quiet, present. Let your body speak to your mind in its own language. Let it remind you that thinking isn't everything, that clarity is a full-body process, that stillness can be earned through motion. This is not a technique to try, it's a practice to live. One breath, one stretch, one shift at a time. This is how you reset your clarity. This is how you hold your center, not by overpowering your thoughts, but by anchoring your body. That's how you stay focused. That's how you return, always, back to presence, back to peace. Once you begin reconnecting the mind with the body through micro-movements, something fundamental starts to shift. The fog doesn't stay as long. You respond faster, recover sooner, and return to the present more easily. But even as your clarity strengthens during the day, there are two crucial moments that can either anchor that clarity or unravel it completely: when you wake up and when you go to sleep. These quiet transitions hold immense influence over your mind. What you think in these moments often sets the emotional rhythm for everything that follows or lingers. The thoughts that greet you in the morning and the ones you carry into sleep are not always loud. Sometimes they whisper, sometimes they hide under distraction. But whether obvious or subtle, these thoughts shape your internal world. That's why learning to perform a simple, honest mind audit at both the beginning and end of your day can create a powerful shift in your mental stability. You're not adding more thinking. You're creating a focused space for reflection rather than letting your mind run wild without direction. A morning mind audit helps you observe the tone of your thoughts before they guide your attention for the day. It's not about journaling a list of goals or reciting affirmations. It's about pausing before external input arrives and asking, what is already happening in my mind? This check-in brings awareness without judgment. Are your thoughts heavy, scattered, focused, neutral? By acknowledging them directly, you stop them from operating unconsciously. You gain clarity on where you're starting from. This doesn't require a long process, just 1 or 2 quiet minutes. Before you reach for your phone, before you speak to anyone, you ask yourself what's present internally. You name it, even if only in your head. There's tension, there's expectation, there's calm. Whatever it is, you notice. This creates distance from immediate identification. You are not your morning mood. You are the one observing it. Over time, this habit changes how you move through the rest of the day. You stop mistaking early anxiety as a sign that something is wrong. You recognize it as a state that will shift. You stop reacting to it automatically. Instead of letting your thoughts dictate your attitude, you start with intention. Not to feel good, but to be aware. That awareness alone creates a baseline of control that wasn't there before. You can also use the morning audit to anchor a value. After noticing your thoughts, ask yourself, how do I want to respond today? Not what do I need to do, but what quality do I want to carry? Maybe you choose clarity. Maybe it's patience. Maybe it's honesty. This anchors your mind to something you control. It gives your attention direction. You are training your thoughts to align with action, not chaos. The evening mind audit works differently, but is just as important. At night, the mind often plays back the day without structure. It replays conversations, tasks, moments you wish had gone differently. This replay becomes background noise in your sleep. But if you take just a few minutes to observe your mind before bed, you begin to clear that space deliberately. You stop carrying unresolved mental noise into rest. The evening audit starts by asking, what thoughts are still active? Again, you don't need to fix anything. You simply name what's still spinning. There's a lingering worry about work. There's tension from a conversation. There's satisfaction from something I finished. By noticing, you acknowledge, and what's acknowledged loses intensity. You create closure, not through solving, but through recognition. You can follow that by asking a second question. What do I want to let go of tonight? Not to suppress it, but to release your grip. To say, this doesn't need to come to sleep with me. Your brain is always listening. And when you give it permission to release something, even gently, it listens. You may not fully forget the thought, but you won't cling to it unconsciously. That's the difference between mental tension and mental readiness for rest. Both audits train your mind to become aware of itself at the most vulnerable points. These are the moments when your defenses are down, when you're most likely to slip into unconscious thinking. By creating this small ritual of awareness, you set boundaries around your inner world. You show your mind that you are paying attention. That clarity is your standard, not chaos. These practices also build self-trust. You prove to yourself day by day that you're willing to meet your thoughts. You stop avoiding. You stop numbing with instant stimulation. You give yourself space to see what's happening inside you. That integrity, repeated over time, changes how you carry yourself. You walk with more certainty because you're not hiding from your internal state. You can even extend this practice slightly by writing just one line each morning and evening. Not a full journal entry, just a thought check. This morning I notice, and tonight I release. Over time, these short lines become a map of your mind. You see the patterns, you see the progress. You gain context that deepens your ability to respond, not just react. This also protects your boundaries from external influence. Most people's mornings begin with input, notifications, headlines, schedules. Their internal voice never gets a chance to speak before being drowned out. And at night, they fall asleep while consuming distraction, never really returning to themselves. These audits change that. They put you back in touch with what is truly happening beneath the surface. There's another benefit. Mental clarity deepens in sleep. If you go to bed with unresolved thoughts, your subconscious often tries to work through them during rest, which leads to unrestful sleep. But when you offload those thoughts gently before sleep, your mind settles. It knows it doesn't have to hold everything through the night. You wake up with more energy, more space, and a cleaner state of mind. Even the Stoics practiced this. Marcus Aurelius wrote each morning and night, not to write perfectly, but to clear his mind. He reflected honestly on where he failed, what he carried, and how to live better. It wasn't performance, it was cleansing. He wasn't trying to control his life, he was building his awareness so he could live with greater alignment. This is what the mind audit gives you. Not control over every thought, but a relationship with them. A rhythm, a gentle container that reminds you who you are before the world begins and after it winds down. This rhythm teaches your nervous system to expect clarity, to expect awareness, and eventually it becomes your default way of being. If you forget one morning or night, don't try to catch up. Just return the next time. This isn't a task to check off, it's a space to return to. Even 10 seconds of honest noticing can bring you back. You don't need to make it complicated, you just need to make it yours. Over time, you'll begin to crave these moments, not because they always feel good, but because they always bring you closer to yourself. You'll stop feeling like the day happens to you. You'll stop ending the day with a cluttered mind. you'll build structure inside your attention, and that structure makes it easier to think, feel, and choose on purpose. Let this practice be your quiet edge, your moment of personal truth. No performance, no pressure, just reflection. And from that reflection, a stronger sense of center. That's how you sharpen your mind, at the edges of sleep and wake, when it's easiest to drift. That's where clarity is either lost or built. You choose, one moment at a time, one honest audit at a time. After you begin and end each day with honest reflection, your mental rhythm becomes clearer. You notice thoughts sooner. You feel less trapped in moods that used to linger without explanation. Your awareness sharpens, and with it, your ability to choose how you respond. But even with that progress, some thoughts still hold power. Some fears, worries, and worst-case scenarios keep returning, not because they're logical, but because they've become deeply familiar. They feed off repetition, playing over and over until they start to feel like predictions. At this stage, clarity requires something different, not just observation, but interruption. Not rejection, but a reframing that breaks the cycle from the inside. This is where the opposite reality frame becomes a powerful tool. It is a deliberate shift in how you examine fear-based thoughts by flipping them completely. You do not argue with the thought directly. You don't try to suppress it. You allow it to appear, then consciously ask, what if the opposite were true? This question is not about wishful thinking. It's a precision technique that helps you exit a mental loop and step into new perspective. You are not replacing a negative thought with forced positivity. You're challenging the mind's attachment to a single interpretation. Most fears feel absolute because they're repeated in the same direction. You tell yourself a version of events over and over until it becomes default. They don't like me. This will fall apart. I'm not capable. These thoughts become templates. But when you introduce the opposite frame, they do respect me. This will work out better than expected. I'm more capable than I realize. You invite the mind to access a path it stopped considering, not as denial, but as perspective. When your brain believes something, it begins to filter reality to match that belief. You see evidence that supports the thought and dismiss evidence that contradicts it. This is known as confirmation bias. The opposite reality frame disrupts this pattern. It says, let's look through the other lens for a moment and see what you missed. The goal isn't to declare a new truth. It's to open the field of possibility so that your actions are no longer based on one mental script. The first step is to catch a repeating worry. This can be something big or small. Write it down exactly as it appears. Then, underneath it, write its exact opposite. Let both statements sit on the page. For example, if your worry is, I always ruin opportunities, the opposite might be, I consistently rise to important moments. If your fear is, this will end badly, the opposite might be, this could open a door I never expected. Your mind may resist the second statement, but that's the point. It shows how stuck the original thought is. You're not trying to convince yourself. You're just making space to see what else could be real. Once you have both statements in front of you, evaluate the original. Ask, what proof do I have for this? Is it always true? When has it not been true? Then do the same for the opposite. Ask, when have I seen this play out in my life? What examples support this frame? You may find that neither extreme is fully accurate, but the process brings you into the middle, a place of more flexible thinking, and from that flexibility, wiser action. This technique is especially effective with fear because fear loves certainty. It convinces you that the worst-case scenario is not just possible, but inevitable. By introducing the reverse, you soften the perceived certainty of the fear. You remove its authority. It becomes one possibility among many, not the truth. The Stoics practiced this kind of reframing often. They didn't deny what could go wrong. In fact, they practiced visualizing misfortune so that they wouldn't be ruled by fear. But they also trained themselves to see opportunity in adversity. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This is not optimism. It is power. The ability to take any outcome and look for what can be used, learned, or strengthened. Using the opposite frame doesn't mean you believe the opposite is guaranteed. It means you're refusing to live as if one narrow fear defines reality. It teaches your mind to become curious again. And curiosity is the enemy of fear. Fear depends on a closed loop. Curiosity opens it. You can apply this in moments of hesitation. When you're about to avoid something because your mind says it will go badly, stop. Ask, what if this goes better than I think? What if the discomfort is followed by relief, growth, or connection? You don't need to force belief. You just need to sit in the alternative long enough to weaken the grip of the original fear. Another way to use this technique is in conversations. When you assume someone is judging you or pulling away, ask yourself, what if the opposite is true? What if they're trying but unsure how? What if they're distracted, not disinterested? This shift helps prevent defensive behavior. It slows reactive responses. It brings back perspective when emotion narrows your view. The mind likes to finish stories. It doesn't like open endings. That's why it often fills in blanks with fear. But the opposite frame offers a new story. One based on strength, not just threat. One where you are capable, not cursed. This frame opens a space where choice lives again. You can also use this to reflect on past events. Pick a painful memory and write the dominant belief that grew from it. Then write the opposite belief and explore how that could have also been true. Not to rewrite the event, but to show your mind that multiple meanings could exist. That pain didn't have to become identity. That failure didn't have to become prophecy. This practice strengthens resilience because it puts your thoughts back in perspective. When you live only in the original thought, life becomes predictable in the worst ways. But when you expand your mental frame, you allow for unexpected outcomes. You stop rehearsing suffering. You make space for possibility. You can also use this in goal setting. When you hesitate to begin because you fear the result, flip the frame. Instead of, what if this fails? Ask, what if this changes everything? Let that frame guide your first action. You're not lying to yourself. You're loosening the hold of pessimism. Over time, this becomes a quiet strength. You walk into situations knowing that whatever fear shows up, you don't have to believe it completely. You can question it. You can flip it. You can see more than it offers. That's freedom. Not the absence of fear, but the ability to step beyond its first suggestion. This technique also increases emotional control. When your thought is no longer taken as fact, your emotion becomes less intense. You create a small window between feeling and belief, and in that window, your wiser self can speak. You learn to listen to yourself without reacting to everything that rises. Use this practice often. The more regularly you challenge fears with their opposites, the faster your brain adapts. It stops jumping to conclusions. It starts looking for balance. You stop becoming the worst-case version of yourself in your own mind. Let this be part of your daily clarity practice. Each time a fear surfaces, meet it with a quiet question. What if this isn't the only version of reality? What if the opposite holds some truth I haven't seen yet? Not everything will flip cleanly. Some fears are rooted deeply. But even a slight shift in perspective can change your next decision, and one new decision can change everything that follows. This is how mental freedom grows, one reversed frame at a time, one opened perspective after another, not through force, but through vision, the ability to see both paths and choose the one that brings peace. Even if fear still walks beside you, it no longer decides the direction. You do, always, and now more clearly than before. As you start applying the opposite reality frame, your mental grip on fear begins to loosen. You no longer see worry as a prophecy, but as one version of a story, one that can be reimagined, rebalanced, reframed. That kind of clarity doesn't just silence noise. It rebuilds your ability to respond with calm. But even after you've learned how to widen your mental lens, there are still moments when thoughts rise so fast, so densely, that no logic or technique can seem to catch them. They press in from all sides, not with truth, but with sheer weight. And in these moments, you don't just need reasoning, you need rhythm. You need to restore your relationship with time, with patience, and with your own breath. This is where the mental hourglass becomes a powerful daily practice. It is not a metaphor, it's a clear mental image, a tool you hold in your mind to regulate the flood of thought and bring you back to presence. When you use the hourglass intentionally, you're not trying to stop thoughts. You're learning to watch them pass. You visualize each one as a grain of sand, falling not in chaos, but in sequence, one by one, not all at once. This image creates a new relationship with mental movement, less like being pulled by a current, more like watching a process unfold at a natural pace. The problem for many people is not that they have too many thoughts, it's that they believe they must respond to all of them immediately. Thought becomes demand. But the mental hourglass introduces something else: distance. You are no longer inside the pile of thoughts. You are watching them fall, slowly, predictably, one grain at a time. This practice starts with visual attention. When your mind feels overwhelmed, close your eyes, breathe, and picture a narrow hourglass in the center of your focus. Picture the upper bulb filled with all the thoughts, sensations, emotions, and pressures of the moment. Let them take shape as grains of sand. Each thought isn't a weight, it's a single grain. No matter how loud it feels, it has its place in the flow. Now bring your attention to the narrow center. This is the passage of your awareness. This is what limits your attention to one moment, one choice, one step. Thoughts try to flood this space, but the hourglass slows them. One thought falls through at a time. You can't speed up the flow. You don't try to fix the thought as it drops. You let it pass. You watch it move downward. Once it falls through, it joins the past. It no longer requires attention. You've seen it. Now, it's behind you. This visualization works because it interrupts urgency. Most anxious thinking is built on the feeling that everything must be addressed now. But the hourglass forces a mental rule. Only one thought can pass at a time. This calms your nervous system. It breaks the illusion of being buried under a mountain. It reminds your mind that it's not being attacked. It's simply processing. You can pair this image with your breathing. Inhale as the sand collects at the top. Exhale as a grain falls through. You create a physical rhythm that matches the visual one. Your body begins to mirror the slowness of the image. Your pulse slows. Your breath lengthens. You come back to presence, not by blocking thought, but by accepting its pace. This tool also teaches patience. When thoughts come in waves, your first instinct may be to escape or push them away, but the hourglass invites you to wait. You don't need to fix every idea or feeling that arises. You let it fall, and then the next, and the next. This is not passivity, it's discipline. You are choosing to move with time, not against it. The practice can be used in both calm and stressful moments. In calm moments, it deepens awareness. You begin to notice the subtle transitions in thought. You see how your attention shifts, how it tries to multitask. You gently return to the narrow center, one grain at a time. In stressful moments, the visualization acts as a container. It keeps your attention from scattering. You no longer try to process everything at once. You stay grounded in the image, in the breath, in the slow fall of thought. This containment creates space, and in space, clarity returns. There's also a deeper purpose. The hourglass teaches you that even when you're flooded mentally, you still have the ability to remain still. The upper bulb can be crowded. The lower bulb can be full of the past. But the center stays consistent. You always return there. It never closes. That narrow opening becomes a symbol of your power, the ability to stay with one thing, one step, one moment. You can also use this practice to bring structure to your reflection. After a long day, picture the hourglass and let each important thought fall through the center as you watch. You don't analyze or control them. You simply allow each one to arrive and leave. This helps prevent mental overflow from following you into sleep. You've created closure, not through control, but through release. Another benefit of this practice is that it builds trust in the process of thought itself. Many people become overwhelmed because they think their thoughts are unfinished unless they're acted on. But with the hourglass, you realize that thinking can be complete simply by being noticed. You don't have to grasp every thought tightly. You can witness them and let them pass. You can even assign colors to the grains if helpful. Bright for creative ideas, gray for anxiety, blue for memory. This can help you notice which types of thoughts dominate. You begin to see patterns not just in what you think, but how you think. The hourglass becomes a mirror. You learn without judgment. You adjust your input. You shift your environment. You gain insight without force. This practice is especially helpful when paired with moments of transition. Use it when shifting between tasks, when switching from conversation to solitude, when moving from tension to reflection. It teaches your brain that transitions can be slow, that it doesn't need to rush from one demand to the next. The Stoics believed in the power of measured attention. They taught that reason must lead emotion and that control begins with awareness. The hourglass is a practice of that principle. It doesn't reject thought, it organizes it. It lets the mind remain free without being chaotic. It creates a mental structure where peace can live. When used consistently, this tool becomes internalized. You'll begin to feel the hourglass even without visualizing it. You'll pause when overwhelmed, and your mind will naturally begin to slow its intake. You'll feel the impulse to react, and you'll remember that only one grain can pass at a time. That pause will become your anchor. Let this practice be part of your daily reset. When thoughts feel loud, don't resist them. Don't collapse under them. Picture them falling, one by one. Let the hourglass hold the process. Let your breath guide the rhythm, and know that the storm in your head isn't permanent. It's just a passing sequence. Your job is not to stop it. Your job is to stay with the flow until peace returns. In time, you'll notice that clarity doesn't come from silence, it comes from order. You don't need fewer thoughts. You need less pressure to manage them all at once. That's what the hourglass teaches. Patience, sequence, perspective. You are not behind. You are not buried. You are here, at the center. And from here, everything passes in time. Just stay present. Let the next grain fall. You're already doing enough. One thought at a time. One breath at a time. That's the way through, always. Once you begin visualizing your thoughts through the hourglass, you realize that time and order are your allies. You don't have to answer everything at once. You don't have to carry every question until it crushes you. Watching thoughts pass, grain by grain, creates space between reaction and response. But even with this clarity, there is one force that continues to return, often quietly, sometimes disguised as responsibility or caution. It interrupts your focus. It asks questions that don't need answers. It builds stories without endings. This force is overthinking. And while you've learned how to slow it, examine it, and redirect it, now it's time to take the next step. You give it a voice, not to feed it, but to reduce its grip. Overthinking feels powerful because it often speaks with urgency. It tells you that something is missing, that something must be fixed now, that without constant mental effort you will fail or forget or fall behind. It repeats itself not to help you, but to stay in control. It wants you to confuse thinking with solving and rumination with responsibility. To step out of this loop, you don't need to silence overthinking. You need to separate from it. You need to stop letting it speak in your voice. This is where the practice of assigning a voice to overthinking becomes a quiet but powerful tool. You give it a name, a tone, a personality. Not to play games with your mind, but to interrupt the automatic fusion between you and the thoughts that drain you. When you personify overthinking, you take it out of the position of authority. You stop letting it narrate your life. You begin to see it as a character that visits, not the truth that defines you. This works because of how the brain handles identity. Thoughts that sound like your own voice feel personal. If overthinking says you're not prepared, it feels like insight. If it says you're going to fail, it feels like protection. But once you give that voice an identity, once you say, "Oh, that's just the worrier talking again," you create distance. You stop merging with it. You observe it instead. Begin by listening closely. What tone does your overthinking take? Is it loud, frantic, whispering, condescending? Does it sound like a coach, a critic, a worried parent, a panicked friend? Once you understand the tone, you can choose a name. You can call it something playful, something neutral, something that breaks the spell. You're not mocking it. You're shrinking its control. You can say, "There goes nervous Nora again," or "That's forecast Frank warning me about things that haven't happened." The sillier or gentler the name, the more power it loses. This step isn't about disrespecting your fears. It's about refusing to be ruled by them. Overthinking thrives in confusion. When you give it a voice, you bring it into clarity. You recognize its habits. You see its patterns. It becomes predictable, and what's predictable loses its power to surprise. Once named, start noticing when this character shows up. The moment the mental spinning begins, pause and say, "Okay, I hear you. What's your point today?" You don't resist it. You don't argue. You let it speak, and then you choose what to do next. By externalizing the voice, you turn the experience from command into conversation. This simple shift moves you from being overwhelmed to being observant. You can also script the voice. Write down a sample monologue from your overthinking. Let it rant. Let it list worries. Don't censor it. Then, in a separate column, respond as yourself, not to defeat it, but to ground it. You might say, "Thanks for your input, but I've already made this decision." Or, "I know you're trying to help, but I don't need that feedback right now." This practice builds inner leadership. You learn to stay present without being pulled into panic. Over time, this technique teaches you something deeper, that overthinking is often trying to protect you, but doing it poorly. It repeats fear to make sure you're safe. It raises questions not because it's smart, but because it's scared. When you understand that, you can meet it with firmness instead of frustration. You can say, "I get why you're here, but I don't need you right now." That's how self-trust grows. Not from force, but from boundary. This practice also softens shame. Many people beat themselves up for overthinking. They think, "Why can't I stop?" But when you treat overthinking as a separate voice, you realize it's not all of you. It's a pattern, a reaction, a visitor. You don't fix it by hating it. You change it by recognizing it. You can also track when the voice is strongest. Certain environments, relationships, or stresses may trigger it. Instead of being caught off guard, you anticipate it. You notice when the pattern starts. You prepare your response. You might say, "I know this voice shows up when I feel uncertain. That doesn't mean I have to listen." You build clarity in the places where confusion used to live. Assigning a voice also helps in decision-making. When you can hear the difference between your inner guide and your overthinking persona, you stop confusing panic with intuition. You learn to recognize when a thought is fear-based and when it's value-based. You stop rushing decisions just to quiet anxiety. You begin choosing with greater calm. The voice you assign doesn't have to be a joke. It can be gentle. It can even be compassionate. Sometimes overthinking shows up as a younger version of yourself, scared, unsure, trying to help. When you speak to that voice with care, you don't lose control. You gain maturity. You become the adult in the room. You hold the space. This is also useful in communication. When your thoughts are racing before a conversation, pause and ask, "Who's speaking right now? Is it my clear self or is it the critic?" This pause protects you from speaking from anxiety. You answer from calm, not chaos. You begin to trust your timing again. With consistent practice, you'll notice that the voice of overthinking becomes more obvious. It stops blending into your identity. You hear it, label it, and decide how much attention it deserves. You stop feeding it just because it's familiar. You start listening to the deeper voice beneath it, the one that speaks quietly, clearly, without fear. This inner shift is subtle but life-changing. You begin to move through your day with less mental resistance. You don't need to control every thought. You just learn to notice who's speaking. And once you know who's talking, you choose who leads. Let this practice become part of your mental reset. In moments of overload, pause. Ask yourself, is this really me speaking, or is it the voice I've learned to question? That 1 second of awareness changes everything. It gives you space. It gives you choice. Overthinking may still show up. That's okay. but it no longer gets to take over. Not without being seen, not without being named. You are not your panic. You are not your spirals. You are not the loudest thought in your head. You are the one listening, deciding, and returning to clarity, again and again. Let the voice speak, but let it pass. And keep walking. You've heard enough. Now it's time to lead. Once you begin assigning a voice to your overthinking, it becomes easier to step back. You stop reacting to every mental suggestion as if it's your own truth. You start to separate emotion from identity, urgency from wisdom. And as that space grows between stimulus and response, so does your clarity. But even with all that awareness, there are still moments when the spiral begins before you catch it. You feel the old momentum pulling you into familiar thinking. Your attention starts to slip. Your nervous system tightens. And in those moments, you don't need to analyze. You need something ready. A signal. A steady thought to return to. One that grounds you and interrupts the spiral before it takes over. This is where creating a default thought becomes essential. A default thought is not just a phrase. It's a mental anchor you choose in advance. It's the place you go when your mind begins to drift towards stress, self-doubt, or confusion. Unlike temporary affirmations or forced positivity, your default thought is carefully selected for its function, not its beauty. It's not meant to fix everything. It's meant to restore your center. The reason this works is because of how the brain responds to familiar patterns. When the mind spirals, it's often running through rehearsed scripts, fear-based assumptions, emotional predictions, catastrophic scenarios. The more often those thoughts are repeated, the easier it becomes for your mind to default to them. To break this cycle, you give your brain a new default, one that you consciously choose and repeat until it becomes automatic. Think of the default thought as your home base. When things become unclear or chaotic, it's the phrase you return to. It doesn't need to be long. In fact, the shorter it is, the more effective it becomes. It should be easy to recall even in stress. It should sound like a truth you trust, not because it feels good, but because it brings you back to stability. Start by identifying what kind of thoughts tend to spiral. Is it about control, perfection, fear of failure, need for approval, uncertainty about the future? Once you know your spiral theme, you create a counterweight, a phrase that doesn't argue with the thought, but redirects you. Something like, "This is not urgent," or "Let's come back to now," or "I've handled this before." It needs to be believable to you. It must reflect calm, not denial, clarity, not fantasy. You might start with a few possibilities and test them over time. Speak them aloud in moments of mild stress. See which one helps you settle fastest. Over time, repetition builds familiarity, and familiarity makes the phrase more powerful. Your brain will begin to offer it automatically, just as it used to offer worry. You are rewriting the default setting, not by force, but through design. The Stoics practiced this in their own way. They repeated short phrases, not just to remember ideas, but to stay connected to principles. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Epictetus taught, "It's not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgment about them." These weren't thoughts for writing, they were thoughts for returning, for anchoring, for reclaiming peace under pressure. Your default thought becomes part of your internal posture. It supports your attention the way physical posture supports your body. It helps you recover faster from cognitive drift. When panic starts, it's the line that brings you back. When frustration grows, It's the reminder that opens your grip. When nothing feels certain, it tells you where to stand. It also helps preserve your energy. When you have a default response, you don't have to use mental bandwidth to decide how to respond to every thought. You've already chosen. This prevents cognitive fatigue. You are saving decision-making power for more meaningful challenges. You are leading your attention, not just reacting to it. You can use your default thought across many situations. In traffic, during conflict, while waiting, before speaking, after a mistake. Any moment where spirals tend to begin. The key is consistency. You don't change your default often. You commit to it, you reinforce it through use, and the more you return to it, the more natural it becomes. The tone of your default thought matters. It should not shame, scold, or push. It should steady. Think of it as your inner guide's calm voice, a tone that brings your system down without pretending the problem doesn't exist. It speaks to your capability without pretending that everything is easy. You can also pair your default thought with physical cues, a breath, a hand on your chest, a shift in posture. These small signals create a stronger link between the phrase and the state it brings. You are training your body and mind to associate this thought with recovery, with calm, with clarity. Over time, this builds emotional resilience, not because you've eliminated difficulty, but because you've created a reliable response. You don't have to wait until you're calm to act calmly. You simply return to your phrase, your anchor, your chosen reminder. It becomes a bridge between stress and clarity. There's also value in writing it often. You don't need long journal entries, just the phrase, each day, in your planner, in a note, on your mirror. Repetition without clutter. You're not trying to believe it harder, you're letting it become part of your attention landscape. You're training your focus to reach for peace instead of panic. You might even share it with a trusted friend. Let them remind you when needed. Let it be a language of support. When they see you spiraling, a simple shared reminder brings you back faster. It's not correction, it's reconnection. This practice also helps you pause before reacting. When something triggers a strong emotion, your default thought can catch you. It becomes a soft barrier between you and the next reaction. It gives you time to consider, to reset, to choose. That space makes all the difference. When you face setbacks, your default thought can help you reframe. Instead of collapsing into self-blame, you return to the phrase that reminds you of your ability to begin again. When self-doubt grows, it's the thought that reminds you that progress isn't always visible, but you're still moving. These are not motivational slogans. They are mental tools. Their power comes from how often and how consistently they are used. Some examples may include, one thing at a time. I don't need to know everything right now. Let's take the next step. I'm safe in this moment. Breathe, then begin. These are not magic. They are simple truths. They work not by convincing the mind in one moment, but by becoming the default in many. Even in moments of emotional intensity, your default thought helps you avoid collapse. When grief rises, when fear tightens your chest, when disappointment takes over, your phrase won't fix it, but it can help you stay present. It can help you move gently. It can keep you from adding unnecessary weight. This is not a tool for perfection. Some days you'll forget. You'll react before remembering. That's okay. The point is to return. Each time you do, the pathway strengthens. The spiral loses momentum. Your clarity rebuilds. The more you use this practice, the more you realize that most thought spirals don't need full analysis. They need containment. They need guidance. They need a steady voice to bring the system down. And you get to be that voice through the phrase you choose. Let this become your companion, your internal compass, something to reach for without thinking, something that lives just below the noise, always ready to bring you back. You don't need to argue with your mind. You don't need to win every debate. You just need to have a direction, a thought that says, here's where we return. You are not erasing difficulty. You're planting clarity inside it. Repeat your phrase. Return to it. Let it become your anchor. And in time, you won't need to search for calm. It will come looking for you. Because you've built the path. You've named the place. You've chosen the thought. One thought. Chosen on purpose. Spoken with care. Returned to with trust. That's how spirals end. That's how stability begins. Once your default thought becomes familiar and trusted, your relationship with spirals starts to shift. You don't try to prevent discomfort anymore. You learn to meet it differently. You return to center more quickly, not because your life has fewer problems, but because you've trained your mind to respond rather than react. Still, there's another layer of mental strength that many avoid, the part that doesn't just reduce fear, but walks directly toward it. Not to dramatize or exaggerate it, but to strip it of its illusion, to see fear for what it is and become stronger in the face of it. That practice is reverse visualization, and it's not about negativity, it's about resilience. Reverse visualization asks you to think clearly, not just about what could go right, but what could go wrong. Not in a panicked way, but in a structured, calm, deliberate way. The purpose is to train your nervous system to face fear before it controls you, to imagine adversity, loss, or failure not as some unbearable nightmare, but as something survivable. This is not catastrophizing. This is preparation. This is mental conditioning in its most mature form. The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. They believed that imagining potential setbacks and worst-case scenarios was not pessimistic. It was smart. It prepared them to respond with grace and clarity when life shifted unexpectedly. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that he could lose everything: comfort, health, reputation, control. But instead of being weighed down by the thought, he was freed by it. When you've rehearsed loss calmly, you stop living in fear of it. This practice begins by choosing a fear you've been trying to avoid. It could be something you think about often but never fully examine. The loss of a job, the failure of a goal, the end of a relationship, the public exposure of a mistake. You bring that fear into focus, not to obsess, but to look it in the eye. You write it down as clearly as possible. What exactly are you afraid will happen? Once it's named, you walk through the scenario step by step. You imagine it playing out, not in chaos, but in sequence. What would happen first? What would come after? What would you feel? What would you lose? And then, what would you still have? What strengths would remain? What actions could you take next? You continue this process until the situation loses its mystery. Fear loves the unknown. It thrives in ambiguity. But when you bring the fear into clear steps, you take away the fog. You stop seeing the situation as a cliff and begin seeing it as terrain. Rocky, yes, but navigable. You don't minimize the difficulty. You feel it fully. You acknowledge the grief, the frustration, the pain, but you also begin to notice something else. You survive it. Even in the visualization, you find ways forward. You begin to access the part of you that adapts, that adjusts, that still acts with integrity even when things fall apart. This trains your nervous system to respond instead of panic. When you face a version of the fear in reality, it doesn't shock you in the same way. You've rehearsed it. You've walked the terrain. You may still feel fear, but it doesn't blind you. You've already chosen how you'll move through it. This also builds perspective. When you allow yourself to explore loss, you start seeing more clearly what truly matters. You start recognizing what you've taken for granted, what deserves more of your time, what you could let go of. Reverse visualization doesn't just prepare you for the worst, it teaches you to value the present more honestly. You can use this practice regularly, not every day, but at key moments, before a risk, in the middle of uncertainty. When something you care about feels fragile, you sit with the question, what's the worst that could happen? And you answer with clarity, not panic. You look at the version of the event that feels most threatening, and then you work your way through it, slowly, calmly, without collapsing. This process does not make you numb. It makes you more emotionally agile. You are no longer at the mercy of your fears because you've made space to know them. Most people avoid this work because they confuse clarity with doom. But avoidance breeds anxiety. The more you refuse to think about something, the more power it gains. When you look directly at it, that power fades. Reverse visualization also teaches you how much control you still have, even in difficulty. You may not control the event, but you control your response. You control your character. You control your next step. This is how dignity is preserved, not by avoiding adversity, but by preparing for it with eyes open and a steady breath. This exercise is also useful in relationships. When you fear losing connection, being misunderstood, or saying the wrong thing, you visualize those moments. You see the argument. You feel the silence. You explore the discomfort. And then you ask, what would I still choose to do with care, even here? What would I still say that honors my values? This sharpens your awareness of what truly matters in communication. It frees you from needing everything to go perfectly. Use this same process for creative risks, personal goals, and public expression. What if your work is rejected? What if no one understands? What if it takes longer than you hoped? Visualize it. Not to suffer in advance, but to become resilient in advance. To stop depending on only the best-case scenario to stay committed. The practice works best when done with full attention. Find a quiet space. Sit with the discomfort. Don't rush to escape. Breathe through it. You're not trying to eliminate emotion. You're training your ability to stay steady while feeling it. You might follow the visualization with a grounding step. Write what you learned about yourself. Write what strengths you saw even inside the imagined hardship. List what you still had the ability to control. This final step reminds you that you are not powerless, even inside difficulty. This is not about embracing fear as a lifestyle. It's about making peace with its presence. The fear may still come, but it will no longer be unfamiliar. And when it's no longer unfamiliar, it's no longer paralyzing. Over time, this practice changes your baseline confidence. You stop being shocked when plans change. You stop reacting with despair when uncertainty appears. You've prepared. You've walked through difficulty in your mind with calm and clarity. And because of that, you know you can respond with strength in real life. You also begin to trust yourself more. Not because everything will go well, but because you know who you are when it doesn't. You stop fearing difficulty as a threat to your identity. You start seeing it as a test you've already studied for. The Stoics believed this was one of the highest forms of preparation, to expect challenges, to welcome them when they arrive, and to use them to grow in wisdom, not by being passive, but by being ready, by making clarity a habit, not a reaction. Reverse visualization becomes part of that habit. You walk through fear, not because you want it, but because you don't want it to lead you. You face the storm in your mind, so when the clouds appear in life, you're already steady. Let this be your inner discipline, quiet, intentional, grounded in reason. You don't imagine the worst to suffer, you imagine it to rise stronger. You do this not to expect loss, but to become unshaken by it. That is the gift of this practice. Not just resilience, but peace inside uncertainty. And from that peace, clear and steady action. Always. After consistently practicing reverse visualization, you start to understand something most people never allow themselves to see. Much of your fear loses power the moment you face it. You no longer live in fear of what might happen because you've already walked through the storm mentally and returned. You've built a mind that can see clearly even when life is uncertain. But there's another layer that strengthens clarity more than all the inner strategies combined. Learning when to stop speaking, not in protest, not in silence born of resentment, but as a chosen pause, a return to inner stillness. Because while the world teaches us to speak, explain, react, and perform, clarity often waits quietly in the space where words are no longer needed. This is where the practice of silence fasting begins. It's a conscious decision to refrain from speaking for a set period of time, not forever, not to isolate, but to reconnect. You're not removing speech because talking is bad. You're stepping back from the habit of constant expression so you can hear what's underneath it. In silence, the mental noise that usually hides behind conversation comes forward. You begin to hear your thoughts more clearly, not because they're louder, but because there's less to compete with. You begin to notice how much of your talking has been used to fill space, reduce discomfort, or gain approval. Silence. Fasting doesn't mean avoiding connection. It means giving your inner world a chance to breathe without performance. It's not about being antisocial. It's about becoming more grounded so that when you do speak, it's from alignment rather than anxiety. The practice begins by choosing a time frame. This could be a few hours, half a day, or an entire day. During this time, you do not speak unless absolutely necessary. You do not explain the silence. You let it be what it is, a boundary that protects your mental space. You'll notice something almost immediately. The moment you stop speaking, your brain will try to fill the gap. It might replay past conversations. It might rehearse future ones. It may search for distractions to avoid the quiet. This is where the work begins. You watch the urge to speak, to text, to perform. You watch without judgment. You let the discomfort teach you where your peace has been tied to external expression. The longer you stay silent, the more space opens inside you. Thoughts rise, but they don't stick the same way. Without speaking, they lose urgency. You don't need to form them into perfect sentences. You stop needing to sound right, and because of that, your mind begins to slow. It doesn't stop, but it becomes more spacious, more orderly, less reactive. This kind of silence also helps reset your nervous system. Speaking often comes with microbursts of tension, especially when you're trying to be understood or avoid conflict. Silence removes that pressure. You don't have to manage anyone's perception. You are not explaining yourself. You are simply here, in your own presence, without needing to shape it for others. The Stoics valued silence not as a punishment, but as a practice. Epictetus taught that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we may listen more than we speak. They believed that speaking less helps you listen more, not just to others, but to yourself. When you stop responding to every thought aloud, you begin to hear which ones matter and which are just noise. During a silence fast, you may still go about your daily tasks. You can work, walk, eat, observe. The difference is that you're not using conversation as a buffer. You're allowing your attention to stay within. Even routine actions become more mindful. You notice the way you move. You feel more present in your body. Your awareness sharpens not because you're doing more, but because you're doing less on purpose. It's important to note that silence fasting doesn't mean isolation. You can be around others. You simply don't speak unless required. This adds another layer of growth. You learn to be present in company without needing to fill the air. You begin to feel where your words used to rush in from fear or habit. And in that pause, you find power, not from saying the right thing, but from choosing when not to speak. This practice also highlights how much energy you spend in conversation. Speaking, listening, explaining. It all draws on your cognitive resources. In silence, you conserve that energy. You redirect it toward inner clarity. You stop scattering your attention through constant output. You collect it. You hold it. And in that holding, your thoughts become more organized. You may also find that silence reveals thoughts you've been avoiding. In normal conversation, it's easy to stay on the surface, but silence invites depth. You begin to hear the thoughts you've edited out. You realize what's unresolved. You find the feelings that have been pushed down beneath the noise. This is not always comfortable, but it's always clarifying. One of the greatest benefits of silence fasting is what happens afterward. When you return to speech, you do so more intentionally. You're less likely to speak out of habit. Your words carry more weight because you've spent time in stillness. You're more attuned to what needs to be said and what doesn't. You become more careful with your voice, not from fear, but from respect. This practice also helps reduce emotional reactivity. When you get used to silence, you stop reacting to every impulse to speak. You pause, you reflect, you ask, is this helpful? Is this necessary? That pause is where wisdom lives. It doesn't mean you become quiet forever. It means you become deliberate. Your speech becomes an act of choice, not compulsion. Silence also helps you understand others better. When you stop preparing your next reply, you start actually listening. You notice tone, posture, emotion. You hear what people are really saying, not just their words, but their state. This deepens connection. It brings empathy back into communication. For those who feel pressure to be understood constantly, silence fasting can be deeply healing. It reminds you that your worth is not tied to being heard at all times. You learn that being silent does not make you invisible. It makes you observant. It brings you back into alignment with your own thoughts before you offer them to the world. Over time, silence fasting becomes something you crave, not because you reject others, but because you found a source of renewal that doesn't depend on noise. You realize how much clearer your thinking becomes when you're not constantly explaining yourself. You see how much tension drops when your only goal is to be present. You can pair this practice with journaling after the silence ends. Write what you observed. What thoughts repeated? What did you notice about your behavior? What felt difficult and what felt peaceful? These reflections help you build self-awareness without judgment. They teach you how to carry the calm of silence into your speaking life. You don't need to do this daily. Even once a week can create deep shifts. Over time, the silence becomes less of a practice and more of a state you carry with you. You may find that even in conversations, part of your mind remains quiet, watching, listening, holding space. That internal stillness changes how you interact. You speak from calm, not from urgency. You listen from presence, not from reaction. Silence fasting is not about withdrawal, it's about return. You're returning to your own voice by first stepping away from noise. You're teaching your system that it doesn't need to fill every gap. You are not performing. You are not proving. You are just being. Let this practice remind you that stillness isn't absence. It's awareness. And in that awareness, clarity grows. Not from effort, but from presence. You don't need to explain yourself into peace. You need to feel it in the space you've been avoiding. Let silence speak to you. Let it teach you what your own voice sounds like without pressure. And when you speak again, let it be from truth, not from habit, not from fear, but from a stillness that holds everything in place. Once you've experienced the discipline of silence, you begin to notice just how much of your energy has been spent on speaking without intention. The clarity that rises from simply not responding to every impulse is unlike anything that can be found in noise. Your thoughts slow, not because you forced them to, but because you finally gave them room. That space becomes a doorway, one that opens to something deeper, something older than language or structure. At some point, inner stillness craves a reflection in the outer world, and that reflection is found not in more silence indoors, but in nature, untouched by distraction. Not nature on a walk while listening to music, not nature with a podcast or camera in hand, just nature, alone, present, and without input. Spending time in nature without devices is not about being productive or aesthetic. It's about exposure to something greater than yourself without needing to process it through a screen, a filter, or a stream of thoughts. It's about letting your nervous system recalibrate in the presence of something that doesn't ask anything of you. Trees don't speak. The wind doesn't rush you. The water doesn't judge. Nature simply exists. And when you let yourself be in that environment without taking anything from it, your mental state starts to shift in ways that are hard to explain but impossible to ignore. This practice is simple. You step outside and leave everything behind. No phone, no headphones, no need to record or document. You don't go to plan or brainstorm. You don't use it as a break before returning to the noise. You go as a way to remember something that the modern world constantly pulls you away from, what it feels like to be part of the earth instead of separate from it. You're not going to nature. You are nature. You're just returning to it. What happens when you walk through a forest or sit under the sky with nothing to occupy you is profound. At first, your mind may resist. It will try to find something to latch onto, an idea, a plan, a memory. It's used to being entertained or stimulated, but if you wait, if you keep walking or sitting or observing, something shifts. The mind softens. The need to narrate fades. Awareness rises, not in words, but in presence. Your senses return. You feel temperature again. You notice light differently. The sound of birds, leaves, distant wind, they begin to reach places inside you that words never could. Being in nature without input is a direct invitation to reconnect with rhythms your body has always known but forgotten. Biological rhythms, light, sound, temperature, interact with your nervous system in a way no device can replicate. The color green alone, seen in natural form, has been shown to reduce stress and lower cortisol. The sound of birdsong signals safety to the primitive part of your brain. The slowness of trees reminds your own body to exhale. These effects aren't conceptual, they're physiological. Without input, you become aware of how much your nervous system has been pulled in every direction. You feel the effects of multitasking, digital overload, and emotional fragmentation. And as you give yourself to the pace of your surroundings, that tension starts to leave your system. It doesn't ask for permission, it just starts dissolving, one unnoticed layer at a time. This practice is also where real perspective returns. When you're constantly surrounded by information, everything feels important. Every notification becomes a decision. Every post becomes a comparison. But in the stillness of nature, you begin to see again what matters. Not through thinking, but through remembering. You remember that life doesn't need to be managed to be lived. You remember that peace doesn't come from finishing tasks. It comes from releasing what never needed to be carried. You can practice this in many ways. A walk through a quiet trail, sitting by a lake, standing barefoot on grass, watching the wind move through trees. There's no specific posture or rule except one: no input, no screen, no stimulation from man-made noise, just you and the world as it is, without edit or interruption. The longer you stay, the more depth you feel, and not just peace. Sometimes things come up, emotions you've buried, thoughts you've postponed. But nature has the capacity to hold them. You don't need to resolve them instantly. You can let the environment metabolize what you've carried. You can let it show you that healing is not always fast or loud. It's often slow, quiet, and deeply grounded. This practice also changes how you return to your day. After time in undisturbed nature, you don't want to re-enter distraction the same way. You become more protective of your attention. You recognize how noisy the modern world is, not just in sound, but in expectation. And you start setting stronger boundaries, not out of resistance, but out of clarity. You may also notice that your creativity returns, not forced creativity, but natural insight. Ideas flow not from pressure, but from spaciousness. The mind, no longer pushed by deadlines or comparison, starts connecting thoughts more organically. Some of your best ideas may come from these silent walks, but that's not the goal. That's just a result of giving your brain what it actually needs: rest, space, and a return to sensory connection. You don't need to live in the forest to access this. A park, a beach, a small patch of trees. Even 10 minutes with no devices can shift your mental state. What matters is not the setting's size or perfection, but your willingness to meet it without interference. No playlist, no notifications, no mental to-do list, just presence. The Stoics believed that nature reflected order, wisdom, and proportion. To walk in nature was to align yourself with those qualities. Seneca spoke of walking outdoors to cleanse the mind, not to escape, but to return. They understood that a mind constantly shaped by artificial surroundings begins to lose contact with its own natural rhythm. Nature time restores that rhythm. not just emotionally, but biologically. This practice is not a luxury. It's not something to schedule only when convenient. It's a necessity in a world of overstimulation. Your mind was not built to process endless streams of data. It was built to notice, to respond, and then to rest. Nature provides that rest without needing anything in return. As this becomes part of your rhythm, you'll begin to feel it not just during the time in nature, but after. You'll find yourself more patient, less reactive, more grounded in decisions. You'll start to notice how often others speak just to fill space, and how little you now feel the need to do the same. You'll hear your own voice more clearly, not your thoughts, but the quiet knowing beneath them. Let this become something you defend. Time alone, without input, in the presence of something alive and still. Let it clean the clutter. Let it slow the rush. Let it bring you back to what your nervous system forgot it needed. You don't need to explain this practice to anyone. You don't need to prove its value. The proof is in how you return, how you sit after, how you listen differently, how you stop rushing to fix everything and start trusting that clarity grows in quiet places. Nature doesn't need to speak to teach. It simply stays what it is. And when you meet it without trying to take from it, it gives you what no content ever could: your own presence, returned, steady, and unshaken. This is not retreat, it's reconnection, the kind that doesn't just quiet your thoughts, but restores your entire way of seeing. And from that seeing, you lead with clarity again, always. You've just walked through a path most never take, not a shortcut, not a surface fix, but a full, deep reset, a journey into your own mind through the lens of Stoicism, from naming your thought loops to building rituals that bring finality, from letting go through silence to grounding your nervous system in nature. Every lesson here wasn't about escaping overthinking. It was about seeing clearly, choosing wisely, and stepping back into ownership of your inner world. You now know how to pause without panic, to question thoughts without fear, to sit with uncertainty and still move forward. You've learned that peace isn't passive. It's something you train, something you return to, and something that waits always on the other side of presence. Now, let's hear from you. In the comments, finish this sentence. My mind is clearest when. There's no wrong answer. Your reflection might be the clarity someone else needed. And if this journey sparked something in you, if you felt seen, grounded, or even challenged, subscribe to the channel. Not because we chase numbers, but because we're building something rare here. A space for real thought, real tools, and real transformation. Until next time, stay steady, stay awake, and always return to the stillness within.